Chapter 12-19. Chancellor Qi sighed. Crown Prince Xiao Zhuan, Jean Lanting, and the rest only smiled and didn't say anything. They weren't at a position where they could casually argue with Qi Yanglong. At the very least, they weren't at that age yet. As the Crown Prince of Liang, Xiao Zhuan had the most confidence. However, he revered Qi Yanglong the most because there was a huge mountain between him and the Grand Chancellor of Shangyin Academy. Among the group, only he knew about the master-disciple relationship between Qi Yanglong and Half-Inch Tongue. Furthermore, with Qi Yanglong's knowledge and experience, Wu Shizhen and Wang Yuanran would probably think about the situation in the capital and the world even if the old man casually mentioned that the weather was good today. Chancellor Qi looked around and smiled in relief when he saw that the youngsters he mentioned didn't reply. At this moment, Yuan Tingshan took a step forward and smiled. It's really good to be able to live to Chancellor Qi's age. Qi Yanglong looked at this young martial artist whose name shook the capital. Not only did he not blame Yuan Tingshan for his outspoken words, he didn't hide the admiration in his eyes. He looked at Yuan Tingshan and nodded. Indeed, it's better to live than to die. Especially for a battle general like General Yuan, who persevered at the border all year round. It doesn't matter if you lose a few battles, as long as you don't die, you will have everything. Yuan Tingshan was stunned for a moment and grinned. Chancellor Qi, you are much more straightforward than those old fellows in the capital city in the past. If there's a chance to make a trip to Jizhou, I will definitely bring out the best wine. Chancellor, it's impossible not to drink wine. Xiao Zhuan's smile was warm and slightly helpless. Mr. Qi, don't lower yourself to the same level as this boor. Qi Yanglong waved his hand and smiled. Living in the desert border for a long time can cultivate heroic spirit. What you said is true. I will probably make a trip to the border next year, from Liangliao to Jixi. At that time, I'm afraid General Yuan won't have enough wine. Yuan Tingshan chuckled. I've done a lot of shady business of killing the rich to help the poor at the border of Jizhou this year, but not a single copper coin fell into my pocket. However, if I want to treat Chancellor Qi to a few jars of fine wine, I think my salary is enough. Jean Lanting, who had been smiling cautiously the entire time, suddenly stopped smiling. He glanced at the Crown Prince and saw that Xiao Zhuan's face was calm, as if he didn't think that Yuan Tingshan would cause trouble with his words. Wang Yuanran and the others all admired this mad dog Yuan's unbridled behavior from the bottom of their hearts. The old man in front of them was someone the imperial court secretly invited to keep Grand Secretary Zhang in check. When speaking with him, who wouldn't cover their dirty buttocks with all their might, fearing that Qi Yanglong would have a bad impression of them? If that happened, they wouldn't have a chance to make a name for themselves in the imperial court for the next 10 to 20 years. For someone like Wang Yuanran, who could do whatever he wanted in the capital, not to mention Tantanan, even if he met someone like Yin Mao Chen or Yuan Gua, who called him uncle, he would still have to obediently tuck his tail between his legs and pretend to be gentle, courteous, and thrifty. Qi Yanglong gave the seemingly heartless Yuan Tingshan a glance. Such a young and reckless hero had tormented the lifeless officialdom of Ji province to the point that it nearly broke its old bones. The reason Yuan Tingshan came to the capital was to bring a bramble and ask for punishment. If he still didn't come, perhaps even his foster father, Gu Jiantang, would not be able to keep his official title and military power. Yuan Tingshan had gone on a killing spree in the region of Ji province. Many of the tyrannical clans that had been rooted in the region for over 100 years were accused of treason and recklessness. They were executed first and reported later. Before the Ji province's governor, Qin Huchen, could report to the Ministry of War and the Ministry of Justice, Yuan Tingshan had their heads chopped off. If it were only one or two incidents like this, perhaps Qin Huchen would just turn a blind eye to it. He might even cover up for Yuan Tingshan, the foster son of Gu Jiantang. But after autumn came, Yuan Tingshan's tyrannical behavior became more and more serious. The marriage between Ji province and Ji province was closely connected, and the power of each family was intertwined. The so-called 12 families in Ji province married each other, and almost all the clan leaders were related by marriage. As a result, Yuan Tingshan killed 4 of them in one go. As a result, the border of Ji province was plunged into turmoil, and the imperial censor was impeached because of it. The general of Ji province and the deputy general who was in charge of the military affairs in Ji province were implicated. Not only were they severely reprimanded by the Ministry of War, it was said that even the emperor had started to pay attention to this matter. Finally, he shifted his solemn gaze from Guangling province to Ji province. Gu Jiantang, the great pillar of Ji province, paid no attention to this, and showed no sign of supporting this foster son of his. After that, Yuan Tingshan quietly came to Great Peace City, and somehow got on the Crown Prince's boat and came to Qi Mansion. As someone who was nicknamed Mad Dog Yuan, he must know that talking to Qi Yanglong was no different than talking to the emperor directly. And to a certain extent, it was more tactful, and more beneficial. The old man seemed to feel the heavy atmosphere around him. He laughed and patted Yuan Tingshan's shoulder. He didn't play dumb with this warlord of the border who was quite a bit lower in seniority, and said straightforwardly, "Since you flatter me that I, Qi Yanglong, am a straightforward person, General Yuan can also be straightforward. On this trip to the capital, you brought the entire dowry of Yanbao's daughter. You haven't even warmed it yet, and you're already using it to make connections. I heard that it's not very effective, and not many people dare to accept it. As for me, I'm not a high official, and I'm not afraid of losing it, so I can help you say a few words. I'm not entirely helping you, but in the end, I'm just going with the flow and helping you resolve your urgent situation. There shouldn't be a problem. However, General Yuan, you have to consider the crux of this matter yourself. Otherwise, if it happens again and again, no one is willing to waste their face and incense for nothing. On this point, you can learn from the king of Bailiang back in the day." Yuan Tingshan couldn't help but sneer at Qi Yanglong. However, he could only hold back his complaints when he was facing this grand chancellor who had a profound and unfathomable knowledge. Otherwise, even when he was facing the great general Gu Jiantang, who had contributed to the annihilation of 2 kingdoms, Yuan Tingshan would still be straightforward. Naturally, Qi Yanglong had heard about the grudge between this man and the Su family. Therefore, he said earnestly, imitating a worthy person is a realm that only a virtuous person can achieve. However, if you wish to catch up with your enemy's power and status, it's something that everyone has. The latter is easier to accomplish. It's just like how you, Yuan Tingshan, didn't find Mi Fu, who had 9,000 soldiers and horses, an eyesore of Qin Yu, who was the lord of a province. Therefore, you've been thinking of adding a few thousand soldiers to your army, or even pushing Qin Yu away and becoming the provincial governor, an important official of the border. You've been building momentum for this recently. Then, based on the same logic, why can't General Yuan learn from Ren Tu and carefully study the history of this martial artist who had achieved great merit in the spring and autumn period? Could it be that the true thought in your heart is? When he said this, the old man narrowed his eyes. Yuan Tingshan quickly interrupted Qi Yanglong and said with a bitter expression, Hold on, hold on. I'm scared of you, Mr. Qi. Don't worry, I've understood what you mean. As long as you're still in the imperial court, I'll do as you say. What do you think? As for where my position will be in the end, and what I'll do at that time, if you've retired at that time, I dare not say that I'll listen to everything you say, but I'll still listen to your advice. Chapter 12:20. When the bystanders heard this, they felt as if they had fallen into a fog. The hedonistic son of a wealthy family, Wang Yuanran, didn't even listen since he didn't understand. He absent-mindedly admired the flowers, plants, and strange stones in Qi Manor. Jean Lanting carefully chewed on the words of the old and young. This second-in-command of the Imperial College who already had one foot in the center of the dynasty already knew too much inside information. First, Chancellor Qi said he was just going with the flow. In that case, not only was the emperor not angry about Ji Bei's turmoil, he was instead happy to see it happen. Jean Lanting didn't find this strange. Back then, when the entire Han family died, it was only the first wave of cutting grass in Ji province, this important border region. What followed next was probably the second wave. Second, Chancellor Qi revealed that there would be a patrol of the entire eastern border in the near future. Perhaps the Tu Liao were dissatisfied with the imperial court's suggestion of having an assistant minister of the Ministry of War patrol in place of the Son of Heaven, so there was some backlash. There was an urgent need for an important figure with even higher authority than a third-ranked assistant minister to pacify them and set down the rules first. Then, in the future, that assistant minister patrolling the border, supervising local military affairs move could be followed. Jean Lanting even thought further. Assistant minister patrolling the border, right now, it was only the Tu Liao. Could he take an even bigger step and expand the border to Beiliang in the western border and southern Tang Path in the southernmost territory? Third, the elder wanted Yuan Tingshan to learn how to kill Su Shao. Did this mean that the imperial court, which had previously bestowed the posthumous title of Wuli, was starting to change its direction when Beimang invaded the south? Did they want to add some good reputation for Su Shao in official history? If this really was the case, then Jean Lanting couldn't continue to oppose the imperial court at this time. Jean Lanting subconsciously stared at the pile of fengshui stones that seemed incomparably ugly to him. He suddenly felt that he was no longer that fledgling who had just entered the capital. He didn't dare to claim that his wings were fully grown, but he had more or less figured out the hidden context of the Liang dynasty. In the future, as long as he followed Qi Yanglong's words and went with the flow, why would he have to worry about not leaving his name in history? Why would he stay in seclusion in a small imperial college for the rest of his life? Eternal Emblem Spring, that was the 20-something years of peace and prosperity Grand Secretary Zhang and Tantanon worked together to create. Then in his hands, wouldn't he be able to create an even greater auspicious symbol spring? He was still young, only in his early 30s. As long as he paid attention to his health, he could at least live for another 40 years. It was definitely not a delusion to serve 2 or 3 emperors. When he reached Qi Yanglong's age, would the same scene repeat itself? A group of young men who had the greatest hope of ascending to the top of the imperial pavilion were standing outside the hall of the mansion and treating him as if he was a god. The old man probably felt that it was inappropriate for him to favor Yuan Tingshan too much. Therefore, he turned around and chatted with Wu Shizhen, little Zhenren Wu. Great Zhenren Wu has been running around for the past year. A few days ago, your father came to our mansion as a guest. When I saw him, he was even thinner than this old man. Little Zhenren Wu, you should tell your father that health is more important than anything else. Wu Shizhen was immediately overwhelmed by this unexpected favor, hurriedly bowing deeply with his hands clasped in front of him, feeling both fear and pleasant surprise. He said excitedly, my father has admired Sir Qi for a long time, privately saying that being able to work together with Sir Qi is his greatest honor. This youngster believes that even if my father loses a bit of weight, as long as it can accumulate a bit of good karma for the imperial court, it is also something that cannot be passed on. Capital Song family originally had the great and young masters, their power overturning the literary scene. Now, it was replaced with the great and powerful Wu family great and young masters, in charge of Northern Dao sects affairs, using one surname to face another, standing on equal footing with Dragon Tiger Mountain's heavenly master manor. Great Peace City was just like this. When the elders left, there would always be new people quickly taking their place. Qi Yanglong dismissed this with a laugh, nodding his head. Then, he looked towards Wang Yuanran. This youngster was just given a look by this elder, yet he was already silent like a cicada in winter. Where was the arrogance and conceit he normally displayed when exchanging cups with his rogues? The elder sighed and said, the newborn calf does not fear the tiger. This is a good thing for people who have nothing to lose. Wealth comes from danger. But if you young people of noble status are not afraid of anything, then you are harmful to the country. Yuan ran, it is not easy for Minister Wang to become an official. Although you are not the eldest son and do not need to carry the burden of the family, you are the most loved by your father. It is also a good thing that you are afraid of this old man. It looks like the rumors in the capital that Tantanon is watching your actions in the Imperial College are not without reason. Yuan ran, do not disappoint Huan Push's good intentions. Wang Yuanran was too busy trembling to understand what the elder was saying. He only nodded his head furiously, his face red. Crown Prince Xiaozhuan saw Wang Yuanran's uneasiness and the corners of his mouth curled imperceptibly. Qi Yanglong then chatted with the two junior generals who were not much better off than Wang Yuanran. Then, he smiled at Xiaozhuan and said, Your Highness, why don't the two of us walk around the Fu? Zhao Zhuan and the old man walked on the quiet stone path that was still shaded by greenery. Qi Yanglong joked, Your Highness, your father-in-law just left and you're already following him. Did the father-in-law and son-in-law make an appointment in advance? What, you want to use your numbers to show off your power to this old man? Zhao Zhuan said with an innocent expression, Mr. Qi, if I told my father-in-law this, then wouldn't the scholar of Dongyuan Pavilion not be able to eat and sleep in peace? When my wife gets angry, it will be my turn to not be able to eat and sleep in peace. The elder laughed and said, Your Highness loves the country and the beauty, it's the fortune of the country. The two of them strolled for the time it took to brew a cup of tea. The young eunuch of Ceremony Directorate, Song Tonglu, suddenly appeared in front of them. Zhao Zhuan didn't say anything and went back the way they came, leading the group of like-minded Eastern Palace guests away from Qi Manor. They all looked like they had come in high spirits and returned in high spirits. Before they all boarded their carriages, Jean Lanting, who was closer to Wu Shizhen, walked forward and said softly, Shizhen, remember, tell your father that Grand Chancellor Qi said that his body is more important than anything else. Wu Shizhen was confused and asked, what does San Lang mean? Jean Lanting didn't explain in detail and said with a calm expression, You just have to pass it on, your father will understand. After being reminded, Wu Shizhen also figured out the mystery behind it. His expression became solemn as he lowered his voice and said, San Lang, Wu Shizhen will remember this kindness. Jean Lanting waved his hand and walked into the carriage. Jean Lanting, who was now respectfully called San Lang by the nobles of the capital, sat cross-legged in the cabin of the carriage that he had purposely changed into. He stretched out his palms and tapped them lightly with his fingers, smiling deeply. It was unknown which wise sage had said that if the entire world was compared to a large net and those roads were the wires, then Great Peace City, which was the center of the dynasty, would be the starting point of this net. Whether or not one could be called an important official of the center didn't depend on what rank they were as an official, but on whether they had the ability to spin silk and weave a net. Jean Lanting felt that he already had this ability because he could influence many big shots of the dynasty and influence the direction of Sun Li. Even if it was still insignificant now, this situation that everyone knew about was not to be underestimated. Yuan Tingshan's trip to the capital didn't have much fanfare. Just like this visit to the Qi Manor, he had taken the Crown Prince's carriage along the way. The two of them sat in the same carriage. Zhao Zhuan and Yuan Tingshan lazily leaned against the walls of the carriage, one on the left and one on the right. Obviously, they were the ones who hit it off the best. Zhao Zhuan smiled and said, Tingshan, why don't you let Sir Qi finish speaking? Yuan Tingshan touched the famous saber, Flood Dragon Tendon, that did not come to him with any reward. His eyes were complicated. Zhao Zhuan closed his eyes and his smile didn't fade. Actually, whether you become Su Shao or Gu Jiantang in the future, I don't care. Compared to my wise and powerful father, I'm far too lacking. Only in the matter of tolerance, I've won by a little. Yuan Tingshan sat up straight as sweat poured down like rain. Zhao Zhuan muttered to himself, the thick frost is fiercer than the blazing sun. It's a pity that the old farmers in the countryside understand this simple principle, but the smart people in the capital don't understand it. Chapter 12:21. In the library of the Qi residence, Qi Yanglong looked at the middle-aged man who could not hide his fatigue and said sadly, "Your Majesty, how can a bow that has been taught for 20 or 30 years not break?" The emperor of the Zhao family smiled and said, "It can't be helped. In the past, I didn't have you by my side to assist me. If you had entered the capital 20 years earlier, I might have been able to live for 20 more years. It's just that life is difficult, and I have accepted it." Qi Yanglong sighed softly and then said seriously, "There's one thing, I don't know if I should ask." The emperor nodded and said, "Just as the previous secret letter said, there's nothing that can't be said and nothing that can't be done." Qi Yanglong asked, "His Majesty can tolerate Tan Tonwing's wild and dissolute behavior, tolerate the drunken sleep of the yellow door guards when they're on duty, tolerate Zhang and Gu right under his nose, tolerate Bai Yan in front of him and Han Xingxian beside him, tolerate the two emperors, Jiangnan's literati discussing politics, and tolerate the scholars writing nostalgic poems. Recall the previous dynasty. You can never slack off on government affairs. In 20 years, you have accumulated as many as 9 million words. Why can't you tolerate a vassal king who lives in a corner and has no intention of rebelling?" The emperor said bitterly, "Mister, you know the answer. Are you afraid that I will make things difficult for Northern Liang?" Qi Yanglong did not speak. His eyes were bright as he stared at the emperor of the Central Plains who had been ambitious since he was young. He did not have the achievements of the previous emperor who unified the world, but his ambition was greater. The emperor felt the simple and unadorned scholarly atmosphere in the library. He was very familiar with this kind of fragrance when he was young. He often tore apart books and played with his brother, Zhao Heng, who was the closest to him. On the other hand, he did not spend much time with his younger brother, Zhao Yi, who shared the same father and mother. The emperor was slightly absent-minded. Returning to his thoughts, he said calmly, "Don't worry, since the only person I can't tolerate is already dead, then Song Dongming of Deer City is still tolerable. If you want to ban the transport of grain and fully support Beiliang in resisting the Mang, I will listen to your advice. Tell the Ministry of Personnel and the Ministry of Revenue to stop making things difficult for Beiliang." The emperor continued, "Before Sir entered the capital, you had previously asked me how I would deal with Zhang Julu. In reality, it isn't that I find it hard to tolerate this Grand Secretary Zhang, but rather that the state of Zhao cannot tolerate him, so I must make a choice. To be honest, my reputation is far inferior to that of the late emperor. Before I ascended the throne, my father was ill. Before the crisis, he established a secret family rule for us princes. Regardless of who inherits the throne, we must emphasize culture and suppress military might. This is also the real reason why Zhao Heng lost to this humble one. He was too similar to the previous emperor. His military exploits were the highest among the 9 princes. If he sat in the north and looked to the south, he would be overlooking the world. Even if he exhausted the country's strength, he would still contend with Bei Mang. Back then, this humble one was still able to stop at a precipice, but Zhao Heng is destined to not be able to do so. I remember when he was young, he said that he wanted to use a jade axe in his hand to draw a border north of Bei Mang and south of Nanjiang. The Zhao family's son of heaven, who could no longer be considered to be in his prime, had his back to Qi Yanglong. He reached out a finger to touch an ancient text, saying helplessly, "When it came to this humble one's son's generation, the eldest son Zhao Zhuan lost to the 4th son Zhao Zhuan. This is also the reason. A person who claims to be an emperor cannot be without ambition, but he cannot be too ambitious either." It is just that, however, Zhuan Er's reputation also lost to this humble one's father. Back then, it was already extremely difficult for me to keep the martial people in check. If Zhuan wants to tame the civil officials, he will also have a long way to go. With or without Zhang Julu's group of civil officials, it will be completely different. Once this humble one dies, with Zhang Julu alive for a year, regardless of whether he is in court or not, Zhuan will have his hands and feet tied year after year. Moreover, Zhuan is born with the demeanor of an elegant scholar. His temperament is romantic. Many times, even though he knows that it is wrong, he will still be soft-hearted towards those scholars who hold swords and brushes. Scholars, even if they truly care about the world, once they are asked to do something that benefits the common people, they will often be unable to do anything. Ambitious but incompetent. Such a civil official, the higher his position, the more terrifying he was. Actually, during the debate between Sir and Chancellor Wang in Shangyin Academy, I am leaning towards the defeated Chancellor Wang. However, these words are not easy to say in this humble one's position. The Liang kingdom has already lasted for more than 200 years, but in this humble one's opinion, the birth of this dynasty is in the first year of Yonghui. Compared to the 400 years of Defeng dynasty, how is Liang different from a baby in swaddling clothes? Zhuan is far from being able to sit back and relax as a prodigal emperor. This humble one naturally knows that there has never been a dynasty that has been passed down for thousands of generations. There will be a day when the world will no longer have the surname Zhao, and the top of the genealogy list will also change to another surname. The descendants of the Zhao family will have both good and evil posthumous titles in the future. However, this humble one hopes that both good and evil posthumous titles will do. It is always better to have more than less. When this humble one was young, I heard the Grand Tutor, who had yet to be abolished, telling history. When he mentioned the years of each dynasty, he always had a feeling that it was like a scholar taking part in a long or short imperial examination. However, the people taking the examination could be passed down by father and son. If someone's answer was outstanding, he would be favored by God, the main examiner. If someone's answer was muddled, something would be deducted. Adding and subtracting, when there was nothing left to be deducted, then the imperial family of the world would no longer have the qualifications to take part in the imperial examination, and thus a dynasty would come to an end. If we count from the time when Taizu founded Liang, I believe that compared to those ancestors, this humble one's governance is 80 to 90% better. I only lose to a few people, including Taizu, who had great talent and vision, and the previous emperor, who had a thorough understanding of people. As the emperor rambled on, his face glowed with a kind of morbid expression. For a long time, it was the emperor who bared his heart, while the old man listened attentively, occasionally smiling knowingly. In today's world, only Qi Yanglong could make the emperor of the Zhao family so happy. He suddenly smiled and said, "Sir, your three disciples, Sun Ping, Sir Yuan, and Sir Xia, have all wholeheartedly supported Liang. It can be said that the four of you, master and disciples, have supported half of our dynasty. You can say that your contributions are truly irreplaceable." From the way the emperor of the Zhao family addressed the three of them, it could be seen that he was close to Qi Yanglong and his three disciples. The time he spent with the scholar Sun Ping was the shortest, but he felt that they could call each other by their names. He addressed Yuan Benshi as Mr. Yuan out of sincere respect, and directly said Xia Feiyu's name, revealing a sense of casualness. Chapter 12:22. The old man waved his hand and said, "Compared to those legendary figures of the spring and autumn period, I, Qi Yanglong, became famous the latest. I'm also recognized as the most stupid scholar. When I was in my 30s, I was still wandering around Jianghu and accomplished nothing. But Zhang Julu and Huan Wen's mentor was already famous all over the world, and there was also that old guy from Gangnam-do who liked to raise cats. When they were in power, I could only watch from afar. I didn't even have the face to visit them. Speaking of my disciples, on the surface, I seem to be the proudest. However, if you really want to compare them, one is Zhang Julu, who has shown his talent, and the other is Huan Wen, who is clumsy. Of these two, Huan Wen is on the same path as me. In the end, he can't escape the conventions of the secular world. As for my 3 disciples, although each of them can surpass their master in some way, compared to Zhang Julu, other than Sun Ping, who has lived for 20 more years, the other 2 can't compare to him. Qi Yanglong sighed and said, Zhang Julu is the only guy who can be called a genius of the world alongside Huang Sanjia. Everyone says that he's just a tinkerer from Liang. Hey, I underestimated Green Eyes. This time I came to the capital, I didn't have the intention to start over. On the contrary, many of Zhang Julu's actions had to be too rigid, so I had to fix it. I'm the tinkerer. If it weren't for Zhang Julu, I wouldn't have been able to do anything. I would have stayed in Shangyin Academy for the rest of my life, doing the bullshit knowledge that no one cares about after a few generations. The old man looked at the emperor of Zhao family, stretched out his hands and laughed softly, Your Majesty, you're a good emperor. There's no doubt that you're talented and intelligent, but you still insist on making up for it with hard work. I dare say that in today's world, there's only an evaluation of generals. If there's an evaluation of emperors, in the past 1,000 years, starting from the great Emperor Qin's reign and counting the next 1,000 years, you can be ranked in the top 10. The emperor was stunned for a moment, then laughed and said, I can also get a similar evaluation of the top 10 masters in the world. Qi Yanglong also laughed and then nodded heavily. The emperor walked to the window of the Iron Sword Guqin library and looked up to see a flock of pigeons flying across the sky of the capital. He vaguely heard the sound of pigeons chirping. He asked self-deprecatingly, Sir, is it that I'm about to die, so my words are also kind? For the first time, Qi Yanglong didn't know how to answer. The emperor muttered to himself, how good would it be if Su Xiao didn't have a son? Otherwise, that young man would die early in the Jianghu, but at the same time leave behind an heir. Then, I won't be stingy to give Su Xiao the greatest title, give that young man a hereditary title, and invite Su Xiao's grandson into the capital to enjoy the special treatment that even surpasses that of Zhao Jialong's descendants. As long as the Zhao clan rules the world, the descendants of the Su clan will enjoy a day of prosperity. Qi Yanglong was silent. Qi Yanglong answered slowly, decentralization. Completely breaking up the local forces. But this has to wait until the world is unified. When the time comes and Beimang is annexed, according to the current system of Liang's 4 major prefectures, counties, and prefectures, the head of a Dao is just a civil and military division between the Jidushi and the Jingshi. As long as the Jidushi completely overpowers the Jingshi, he will be no different from a country's monarch during the spring and autumn period. Liang has suffered the calamity of being separated by the military. We must not repeat the same mistake. Especially after taking over the northern Mang, in addition to the original 14, there would be a total of more than 24 provinces. It might seem like a lot, but at the present level of postal stations, except for the hinterland of the Central Plains, most of the provincial governors and governors were far away from the emperor. The establishment of the Dao level was originally a temporary establishment, and it would be abolished later. Not only that, the 30-plus provinces in Liang now had to be further divided, with some large counties singled out as provinces. Under the premise of maintaining the civil and military co-governance and the checks and balances between each other, there should be 80 provinces in the world in the future. Moreover, the provincial governors and generals of each province had to be rotated every 4 to 6 years. During the rotation, they had to go to the capital to meet the emperor. There won't be too much resistance when this is implemented. After all, when the time comes, the civil and military heads of a prefecture will have real power and their official ranks will be high. Everyone will be happy to see this happen. Even if some of the current Jingshi and prefectures are resentful, they won't be able to resist the urging of their subordinates. If they dare to go against the trend, they will be digging their own graves. The imperial court won't even need to do anything. Qi Yanglong hesitated for a moment. He raised his arm and made a clenching and unclenching gesture. Only then did he open his mouth and say, "This is decentralization. The next step will depend on the ability of the future Zhao Emperor to decentralize. Decentralization can't be too tight. You can't hold on to it and not let go. You can't appoint people by favoritism. You can't think that you'll get it done once and for all. Scholars can debate whether human nature is good or evil. But as an emperor, you have to firmly believe that human nature is easy to change, that greed is hard to satisfy, and that you have to constantly show kindness and severity. But generally speaking, as long as this matter is successful, it won't be difficult for the Zhao family of Liang to remain at the top of the genealogy for another 200 years. As for specific measures, for example, the closer to the border, you can use favoritism and not virtue. The closer you are to the capital, you can use virtue and not favoritism. When you rotate, you must follow this principle. But this kind of thing is ultimately just a minor detail. The emperor listened attentively to the old man's words, not daring to miss a single word. Qi Yanglong seemed to have realized something. He said, "It's inevitable that the world will be divided and united. But if we trace it back to the source, every time the world is in chaos, it's the dynasty that blocks everyone's path to ascension. In fact, it's very simple to be a commoner and an official. That is to let them have a thought in their hearts. With a thought, they will be afraid of death and don't want to die. In the end, as an emperor, no matter how stingy he is, he still has to give everyone a pair of shoes to wear. Don't let the people in the world be barefooted and not afraid of wearing shoes. Because of this, they will have the last thought of daring to pull the emperor down from his horse." On this point, Su Fengnian did very well. From the generals of Beiliang to the civil officials, and then to the commoners, his various actions are to tell the people of Beiliang that I, Su Fengnian, will enjoy the blessings with you and bear the hardships with you. Hearing this, the emperor said softly for no reason, "How good would it be if this young man was my son? Back then, it would have been fine if he had been my son-in-law." Qi Yanglong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He wanted to remind the emperor that there was no such thing as if in the world. The emperor looked out of the building in silence and was in a daze for a long time. Qi Yanglong was also in a daze. This was the first year of auspicious talisman. After autumn, many people felt uncomfortable. But in reality, even more uncomfortable waves were still to come. When the frost killed all kinds of grass, many people would die, and many people who had already gotten rich would die. The emperor suddenly turned his head, tears streaming down his face. "Teacher, I don't want to die yet. I still want to see this world, from the south to the north, a few more glances. It's good to take a few more glances." Qi Yanglong had nothing to say. He stood on tiptoe and was finally able to pat the shoulder of the tall man who was not wearing the dragon robe today. This scene was comical and sorrowful. Chapter 12:23. The tens of thousands of Ji province's old soldiers led by Yang Xinqing were lured into a great trap, setting a bad example for the Liang dynasty that was previously invincible on their way south. Before Chao Zhangqin even made an appearance, they already lost close to 100,000 elites at Guangling Path's borders. This made those spring and autumn period people who had finally managed to integrate into Zhao family's imperial court with great difficulty feel complicated emotions. They were worried about Li Yang's true strength, wondering if they really had the national strength to contend against Northern Mang, and then defeat them in one go. Deep in their hearts, they more or less had an indescribable feeling. Back then, Liang had relied on a large group of generals, including Su Shao, to conquer the world. 20 years later, didn't they still have to suffer defeat in West Chu? As the old saying goes, the river flows east for 30 years and west for 30 years. The Central Plains had been stable for 20 years. It was about time. Could it be that the sky was really going to change? After Yan Jinchuan's army was completely wiped out, the nominal commander-in-chief of the southern expedition, Lu Xingxiang, was still suffering. Although he had not been reprimanded by the emperor, he still had very little military power. It was difficult for him to leave his tent. He was not even as good as another veteran general who had meritorious service in the spring and autumn period. Among them, the dragon general Su Gong, who had been the pillar of the Gumu Su family, was regrettably defeated and continued to be frozen by the court and the Ministry of War. Probably to compensate this valiant general, there was a rumor in Tai and city that Su Gong was expected to be appointed as assistant minister of the Ministry of War to patrol the two Liao provinces. Following the second large mobilization of troops from Liang's capital, West Chu was not willing to fall behind. Riding on the east wind of two consecutive great victories, a young man named Ko Jianghuai, who had risen to fame in the western frontier, followed closely behind, and fought a series of dazzling and beautiful battles. In the eastern front, in a confrontation with the Prince of Guangling, Zhao Yi, who had a unique understanding of military strategy, he actually had a firm grasp of victory. Within 20 days, he had conquered Huangyan Pass, Daijais, and 6 other places, including Huangyan Pass and Daijais. In particular, this man's 3,000 personal guards, called the Flying Ape Army, were able to cross rivers and streams with their armor, as swift as apes. They shone brightly in the Battle of Sheeping Mountain on the eastern front. Moreover, Ko Jianghuai's military strategy was treacherous. Not only was he good at long-distance raids, every time he captured a city, he did not defend it. He had intercepted and killed Zhao Yi's reinforcements 4 times. Except for one time where he failed, all 3 times he wiped out the reinforcements. Until now, he had already beheaded more than 10,000 people, and his military service was illustrious. As a result, on the eastern front, a large area of transition zone that originally belonged to Zhao Yi to delay West Chu's eastern advance had been cut into pieces. It had fallen to the point where no one dared to defend it, and no one dared to save it, allowing Ko Jianghuai's troops to come and go like the wind, slowly nibbling away. Unfortunately, Zhao Yi's right-hand man, Lu Xingxiang, had already been promoted to assistant minister of the Ministry of War and could be considered a member of the imperial court. Moreover, he was the main general of the southern expedition, so he definitely could not contribute to the spring snow building. The infantry general, Zhang Erbao, stayed in the southern border. Zhao Yi did not feel that a fledgling Ko Jianghuai was really worthy of Zhang Erbao's crusade. Xiao Chongqing was more suitable. In the end, Zhao Yi used the 500 Li Express to order his trusted subordinate, General Hengjiang, Songli, to immediately return to the spring snow building from the northern gate of Guangling. The famous general of Guangling, who took advantage of the rich merchants and profited without restraint, seemed to be in no hurry. It was said that General Hengjiang, who had a hobby of collecting beauties, had also taken in 2 beautiful women who had met with misfortune on his way south. That was not all. In order to urge this person to quickly head south to defend against the enemy, the Guangling prince even sent his eldest son, Zhao Yuang, out of the city to receive him grandly. It was obvious how much he relied on this general of fortune. If this was only the internal problem of Liang, then the external threat was like a black cloud pressing down on the city, threatening to destroy it. Beimang's million-strong army had begun to head south. Not only were they eyeing Beiliang covetously, but they were also eyeing the fertile land south of Beiliang, the Central Plains. In the first year of Xiangfu, this eventful period, it seemed like there really couldn't be any more trouble. Great Peace City was bustling with noise and excitement. A white-clothed monk who had previously traveled 10,000 li to the west alone left, and then came Qi Yanglong whose knowledge was as high as the heavens. During this period of time, there was another nameless small figure who occasionally popped his head out, but he quickly returned to silence. Meanwhile, the reason why he was remembered and chatted with for a bit was all thanks to Grand Secretary Zhang's comment, "The Bureau of Weapons is not enough to accommodate talent." Regardless of how high or low the Grand Secretary's comment was, this youngster who caught a glimpse of the imperial court was called Sun Yin, a Beiliang person who Great Peace City loathed the most. Now, he held a post in Minxia province, and could barely be considered a low-ranking person. However, the reclusive Sun Yin was quickly forgotten by the capital, to the extent where he couldn't even compare to the little Daoist master Wu Shizhen who came down from Green City's mountains to the capital. After Tantanon kicked up a ruckus in the Ministry of War's Lu Baijie, not only was Huan Wen not blamed by the imperial court, there were instead rumors that Tantanon might very well become the first great figure who completely grasped control of the entire Minxia province in Liang dynasty. His official rank would also begin to truly be on equal footing with Zhang Julu, rising up into the top few first rank in the dynasty. Not only that, there were also people who said that Tantanon's exceptional promotion this time was the emperor's move to kill two birds with one stone. Not only was it to pave the way for Qi Yanglong to become the head of the Hall of Secretaries, but if the rumors were true, then the two departments of the Hall of Secretaries, which were only nominally divided between the two departments of the Hall of Secretaries, would completely break away from the control of the Grand Secretary. At that time, the situation where the blue-eyed girl could cover the sky with one hand in the spring of eternal Hui would obviously be gone forever. As for whether this was true or not, there were probably only a few people in the entire Liang dynasty who dared to pat their chests to confirm it. In fact, one of the two main parties involved, Huan Wen, also didn't know what the situation was like. However, Tantanon, who was about to be trampled on in front of his house, didn't seem to care at all. On the other hand, the noblemen of the Minxia province couldn't sit still and use various methods to bring wine to the temporary, left servant Shi's mansion to ask for the inside story. Tantanon didn't pretend to be profound and only told them that this was a wonderful thing, and that if he got it, he would be lucky. Tantanon also bluntly said that if he, Huan Wen, could be promoted, his original position would definitely not flow into the field of others. Even if he had to go to His Majesty and make a scene, he would shamelessly promote him from his own Minxia province. As soon as these words came out, everyone in the Minxia province was delighted. Chapter 1224. While Minxia province's undercurrents were surging, Sun Yin, who held the post of minor 8th rank clerk, still left on time every day. When Grand Secretary Zhang's comments were widely circulated, there were rumors that Sun Yin would advance to minor 6th rank Fu Baolang. After all, this post could still be considered one of the Son of Heaven's close ministers. Even though it couldn't compare to last year's newly established study office clerk, who was always by the monarch's side, it was still enough to make the younger generation of influential families rather envious. However, this matter was quickly left unsettled. Minxia province's officials didn't like this reclusive outsider to begin with, happy to see him fail. Sun Yin's position as clerk was something Tantanon temporarily added with a wave of his hand. The old 6 clerks all tacitly joined hands to exclude Sun Yin. In reality, Sun Yin spent every day in Minxia province's yamen doing nothing, to the extent where he didn't even flip through books or practice writing. He just sat in the darkest corner of the clerk's room, other than staring blankly, there was nothing else to do. At first, even the clerk's head felt restraining fear towards this young scholar, but in the end, he was someone Tantanon personally appointed, so for better or for worse, he still had to leave him a bit of face. How he secretly tripped him up was one thing, but on the surface, he could still act amiably. However, as time went on, he discovered that after left servant Shi threw this fella into Minxia province, he didn't pay him any attention at all, not once summoning Sun Yin alone. The only time he stepped foot in was when he discussed past and present with an old and experienced clerk. From start to finish, he didn't even give Sun Yin a single look. As a result, even the last bit of good expression in this yamen was gone. Sun Yin imperceptibly became Minxia province's most leisurely mediocre person, nothing to do, nothing to say, to the extent where he was pitiful to the point where he couldn't make a mistake. Under the autumn rain's dusk, Sun Yin silently walked out of the room, raising his head towards the overcast sky. During this period of time, colleagues occasionally entered and left at his side, but they all turned a blind eye to each other. Then, Sun Yin saw a familiar figure wave towards him. After following, the two walked side by side. When the figures in the distance saw this scene, they were all stupefied. Under the curtain of rain, Tantanon was actually holding an umbrella for a youngster. Yet, that young student who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth could actually be so calm. Sun Yin opened his mouth and said, I heard that the Grand Secretary is holding a family banquet today. Is left servant she going to freeload? Aren't you afraid of being rejected? Huanwen said calmly, it's Green Eye's business whether or not to see him. It's my business whether or not to go. Sun Yin's brows furrowed tightly. He hesitated for a moment and then said, back then, the study in the palace was set up to deal with the Zhang and Gu huts. If there is another head of the Secretariat, we will have a falling out. Huanwen smiled and said, you actually want to say, when the map is unrolled, the dagger will be revealed, right? Sun Yi nodded. Huanwen didn't continue on this topic. Instead, he asked, what have you been thinking about recently? Sun Yin was truly a newborn calf that didn't fear the tiger. He straightforwardly replied, I want to be Sun Ping first, and then Zhang Julu. Xiangfan City has Lu Su as the king of Jing and Zhao Sun rode on behalf of Zhao Sun, and his name shook the capital. In my opinion, it's still a prescription for treating headaches and foot pains. Huanwen smiled and said, oh. Sun Yin said calmly, I have an essay that I've thought of halfway. For the time being, I already have the 8 characters of ascending the throne, ruling the government, managing the household, and patrolling the borders. Huanwen was experienced and ruthless. He had experienced ups and downs in the officialdom for most of his life. Naturally, he could see the farthest reaches. He laughed softly and said, it seems like you've written something for His Highness the Crown Prince. You want to teach His Highness how to take over the throne, how to sit on the dragon throne and face 2 groups of old officials, how to act as a filial son and a strict father, and how to stabilize the territory. Sun Yin, oh Sun Yin, it's not that I want to take advantage of my seniority, but you're just a poor child who has never been a local official or even touched 100 taels of gold. Aren't you biting off more than you can chew to teach others how to govern the world? That scholar Sun Ping is Qi Yanglong's favorite student, and he's fully learned the art of unhindered travel. And Bai Yan has also been under my teacher's tutelage for many years. You? Sun Yin asked in return, wild carps in rivers and rivers can't jump over the dragon gate. Huanwen laughed loudly. It's not impossible to wear white in the morning and look green in the evening. After Huanwen, who was still holding the umbrella, laughed, he sighed emotionally. The good times for scholars have come. Perhaps an article with tens of thousands of words can buy an imperial tutor. At this point, Huanwen turned to look at the young man from Beiliang and asked curiously, if you're lucky enough to get rid of Sun Ping and Bai Yan, who's next? Sun Yin pointed at himself. Huanwen curled his lips and forced out 2 words with difficulty. You deserve to be killed. Huanwen put away the umbrella. The 2 of them sat in a carriage that had already been prepared and slowly drove toward the street filled with nobles. Tantanon lifted the curtain and looked at the familiar buildings. He muttered to himself, logically speaking, when the tree falls, the monkeys scatter. But when the time comes, it'll definitely surprise everyone. Let's see if the everlasting Hui Spring Bamboo that Yin Mao Chen and Wang Xiongui personally promoted by the 2 of us will immediately change. As they approached the Grand Secretary's residence, Huanwen said softly, the scholarly sage once said that those who look at the sea find it difficult to see the water, and those who swim in the door of the sage find it difficult to speak. But in the future, there will be more and more people like you outside the door of the sage in the imperial court. I'm afraid that once you have the power of the imperial court in your hands, you'll be responsible for all the people of the world. Sun Yin was silent. When they arrived outside Zhang Julu's residence, Tantanon opened the umbrella and got off the carriage. As Sun Yin expected, the embarrassed Zhang clan gatekeeper told Tantanon that today was the Zhang clan's private banquet and that outsiders were not allowed to enter. It was clear that Tantanon had now become an outsider. Huanwen didn't make things difficult for the gatekeeper, who couldn't be more familiar with him. He nodded lightly and turned to walk down the steps. Sun Yin didn't immediately follow. He looked at the old man's back and then at the dark sky. For some reason, there was no setting sun or afterglow above his head, but Sun Yin still felt that a certain someone had single-handedly propped up an empire and walked into the twilight. With Zhang Julu's death, the empire's last ray of afterglow would also dissipate. Huanwen had probably finally realized that the young man wasn't keeping up with his footsteps. He stopped 100 steps away from the carriage and turned his head to look. He saw that young man with steady steps. He could see from his body a kind of vitality that he himself had once possessed in the past. Turning the tide, who else could it be but me? He still remembered that a long time ago, within his benefactor's sect, from top to bottom, it was publicly acknowledged that only two blue-eyed people could be one Huanwen. But Huanwen had never thought this way. Even though his benefactor and Emperor Xian had decided that he, Huanwen, would be the head of the Minister of Affairs. He had also been willing to serve as a foil for his best friend, Zhang Julu, for several decades. Huanwen suddenly laughed and handed the umbrella in his hand to Sun Yin. In the future, it's up to you to hold it up. Chapter 12:25. There were many barbarian creek between Shuzhou. The late Emperor of Liang had once patrolled this area. There was actually someone who dared to assassinate him. What was even more inconceivable was that no matter how hard the spy agency, Xiaogo, searched, they still could not find the assassin. The previous head of the ceremony directorate, Han Xingxian, had also once stayed here alone for several months, but still returned without any results. Now, because of the Imperial Wood case, the territory of the old Nanzhao was in turmoil. Rebels swarmed in, and the chaos caused a sudden increase in refugees. The refugees all joined in, and the situation became more and more intense. What was worse was that the barbarians, who had been peaceful for many years, were also ready to make trouble. Even the brother of the late emperor, Prince Rui Zhaozi, who had been in charge of Nanzhao for many years, was implicated. The prince's mansion was burned beyond recognition by the volunteer army. It was not until a troop of no more than 60 people quietly infiltrated the miasma that the chaos of gunpowder settled down. As the troop of soldiers continued to advance south, the truth came to light. This was another troop of soldiers with a different surname after Su Shao, under the command of Qin Jibao. The Nanzhao government did not dare to give orders to this troop. They could only secretly report to their superiors. The post was sent to the capital, and after the report reached Great Peace City, it was completely lost. The Southwest Army, who had waited bitterly to no avail, simply turned a blind eye. Fortunately, the 60 or so people did not disturb the people, nor did they have any dealings with the government. Along the way south, with less than 100 people, they exterminated 16 barbarian Creek tribes of various sizes that took advantage of the chaos. Their power was not to be underestimated. In the end, only the Xiaoxi remained, and the Zhou family of Longxi met a tragic end. More than 600 people, including the old, the young, the women, and the children, were all killed. Everyone's corpses were hung on stilts. Especially when it was said that the troops under the jurisdiction of Nanzhao were the direct subordinates of the king of Shu, Qin Jibao, had come to quell the rebellion. Very soon, no one dared to provoke the bad luck. The people of Shu and Zhao hated the poison warrior Li Yishan and the fat pig Lu Qiuer to the bone. Although at that time, the villain Qin Jibao was only watching coldly from the sidelines, but in the eyes of the people of Shu Zhao who were afraid of being killed, let alone Qin Jibao, who was once the Minister of War, as long as they came from the old 3 provinces of Beiliang, they would not dare to provoke them. In these 10 years, even those barbarians of Shu Zhao who did not accept persuasion, even if they caught Beiliang merchants who came to the south to do business, as long as they had an identity card, left their belongings, and did not harm their lives, they were all respectfully sent out of the country. From this, it could be seen how deep the wound that the Su family had cut in the land of Shu Zhao with a cold knife was. In the hundreds of thousands of barren mountains, there were countless Miao villages scattered like stars in the sky. Those Miao people who were involved with the outside world were called mature Miao by the officials, and those who had never appeared in the world were called raw Miao. Both names were full of a condescending derogatory meaning. In the hinterland of the old Nanzhao, a group of people were resting midway. Under their feet was a dirt path that was not commonly seen in the rolling mountains. There were 3 piles of white stones on the side of the path, indicating that there would be a Miao village not far away. This group of people were all wearing armor and carrying crossbows and sabers. The clothes under the armor were tattered, and they all wore sturdy straw sandals woven by themselves. They were all strong. Although they had traveled a long distance, they did not look dispirited at all. Their eyes were especially sharp, like eagles patrolling the mountains. Next to the pile of stones stood a handsome man who looked to be in his early 30s. His aura was calm, and the armor he wore was no different from the soldiers nearby. His saber was the same, and it was impossible to tell his specific identity. However, there was a tall and sturdy man standing next to him. His entire body was covered in a murderous aura, and his appearance was more in line with the identity of a general than the former. Other than the 6 people who took turns acting as temporary scouts to investigate the terrain, there were more than 50 infantrymen near the 2 of them. Even though they seemed to be resting casually, upon closer inspection, there were many rules. 5 people formed a group, and 5 people formed a standard. Regardless of whether they were sitting, squatting, or standing, there was a clear boundary and distance between each group. Logically speaking, these 60 or so people were at most 3 standard commanders and a dozen or so corporals. However, even the commoner who had not seen the world could feel that none of the people here were people who would submit to the position of standard commander. In reality, when they first entered Nanzhao from western Shu, there were a total of 70 people. The lowest official position was a commandant with real power in Shu. There were as many as 20 lieutenants, and as many as 4 generals. These people had different backgrounds and circumstances, but they all had one obvious thing in common. That was, they were all young. The oldest was no older than 40 years old. In this way, the Western Shu Dao, which had become a vassal after that villain slaughtered his way out of the capital, could be said to have sent out all the young military officials. Among them, the person with the highest official position was the general of Bazhou, Dian Xiongzhu, who had been the confidant of the new king of Shu for many years. Before he entered Shu, he was a 3rd-ranked general in Beiliang. He held the military power of 6,000 iron-footed cavalry. Together with Wei Fuqing, he was the confidant of the then Protector General of Beiliang, Chen Jibao. The other 3 generals were the Ani General Fu Tao, who was stationed at Wenshan, the Zhaolai General Wang Zhuowu, and the Shu Prefecture Deputy General Huyan Wanbao. The 3 generals were all around 35 years old. Their titles were not flashy but useless. Fu Tao was the prince consort of the fallen Western Shu. Wang Zhuowu was a descendant of the old southern Tang who had moved into Shu. Huyan Wanbao was a native of the barbarian tribe. His brother, Huyan Baobao, was the only fierce general that the Western Shu Dao could bring out to compete with Lu Xingxiang. With such a group of fiends and gods of death gathered together, it was no wonder that they were able to move through the territory of the old Nanzhao like there was no one there. After more than 40 battles, large and small, only 8 people had died, and 2 of them had died of illness. However, other than that time when they encountered the 3,000 rebels who had fled to the border, Dian Xiongnu and the other 3 generals had personally gone out to kill the enemy. Other than that, they had only looked on with folded arms. Even if the news of the military merits and casualties of this group of soldiers and horses were spread out, it was believed that no one would believe it. Dian Xiongnu, whose hair was disheveled like a lion, gritted his teeth and said angrily, according to the spy report that Zhao Go gave us, that Western Shu bastard surnamed Su has been hiding in the stronghold up ahead these days. When I catch him, I must peel off his skin and pull out his tendons to prevent him from daydreaming about reviving his country. Chapter 12:26. When Dian Xiongzhu was talking to himself loudly, no one interrupted him, which made the former Beiliang's four fangs even louder. During this journey, Wei Fuqing, Master Wei, had to stay behind in Shishu Dao to preside over the overall situation. Che Yi, that little northern barbarian, also had to stay behind in the territory to enjoy a comfortable life. Only he, the old minister, had the most difficult life. Clearly, there were people he could kill, but he still had to obediently hold back and not make a move. What was the difference between this and having a little girl take off her clothes and flirt on the bed but not being able to eat? During the march, he had to not touch a drop of wine. It was even more impossible to find a tender and beautiful woman to relieve his lust. Dian Xiongzhu was about to suffer internal injuries from holding it in. However, even if he was the second-grade general with the most powerful military power in Shishu, even if he was the minister supporting the dragon, who followed the new king of Shu into Shishu, he still did not dare to violate the military order. At this moment, two scouts who were not patrolling in the direction of the Miao stockade returned with a boy and a girl. Dian Xiongzhu's eyes widened. Damn it, where did this pair of children come from? They are too reckless. How could ordinary people wander freely in the land of the barbarian seedlings? However, although Dian Xiongzhu had always been teased by Wei Fuqing that his head was kicked by a horse when he was young, he was not really stupid. After a few more glances, he could see that the two children were not ordinary. The boy was bald and wore a kasaya. Obviously, he should be a monk from the Central Plains. As for the style of the kasaya, Dian Xiongzhu could not figure it out. Anyway, although it looked shabby, it had the temperament of an eminent monk from a big temple. As for the girl, she was delicate and pretty. Her skin was a little tan due to the wind and the sun, but her eyes were cool and clear. Although Dian Xiongzhu was addicted to martial arts and killing, he was not a notorious general. In those years in Beiliang, there had never been any cases of bullying men and women. As for how vicious he was to the Beimang barbarians, it did not affect Dian Xiongzhu's excellent reputation in the border army. In fact, it was impossible for Chen Jibao's subordinates to have such a lawless devil like Lu Qiu. Having said that, even though Dian Xiongzhu didn't harm the common people, it didn't mean that he was an easy person to get along with, especially when he met such a pair of strange people in such a remote place. He took a big step forward and was about to ask in a deep voice when the silent handsome man beside him also took a step forward. Dian Xiongzhu immediately shut his mouth. The man looked at the boy and girl who he had never met before but knew very well. He was expressionless. The little monk's common name was Wu Nanbei. He was the youngest monk in the two Zen temples but had the highest seniority. His master was the white-robed monk who was rumored to be immortal by eating his flesh. His master's master was the world-famous dragon tree monk, the abbot of the two Zen temples. As for the little girl, she was called Li East and West. She was the daughter of Li Xiaoxin. There were many daughters of emperors in the world, but it was impossible to find two daughters of monks who lived in temples. The little monk Nanbei stood in front of the girls and put his palms together to salute. The man nodded and said calmly, "You two can continue forward, but remember to go around the Miao stockade village in front." The little monk hesitated for a moment and could not help but say, "Since you have the bone of Buddha, I hope you won't kill too many people." The man just smiled and did not say anything. When he raised his arm, the foot soldiers and small squad leaders, who were ready to draw their swords to kill at any time, let go of the hilts and took the initiative to make a path. Wu Nanbei and Li East and West passed through the formation. The latter turned to look at the man out of curiosity. The little monk quickly pulled her sleeve and quickened his pace. After walking for half a mile, Li East and West blinked and asked, "Who is that guy? Is he the leader of the Nanzhao army?" Although his armor is ordinary, he looks quite formidable. His subordinates are much stronger than the previous batches of Nanzhao Dao soldiers we encountered before. The little monk shook his head and said, "I don't know, but that man is really powerful." She suddenly smiled brightly and her eyes narrowed into crescents. How powerful! Is he more powerful than my father? Is he more powerful than Su Fengnian? The little monk thought for a moment and still shook his head. I don't know. The little girl rolled her eyes and said, Stupid Nanbei, if you were in Jianghu, you would definitely be laughed at and called ignorant monk. The little monk laughed mischievously. Stupid Nanbei, we have an agreement. I will only accompany you to Beiliang to see Su Fengnian. We will leave after seeing him. Yes. Actually, it doesn't matter if you take a few more glances. Sigh, my mother used to point at a woman who went up the mountain to burn incense just to peek at my father. She said that woman had high cheekbones and could kill her husband without using a knife. Stupid Nanbei, do you think my cheekbones are high? I have never seriously looked at other women. Do you have high cheekbones? You shouldn't have high cheekbones, right? Tisk tsk, that's right. Last time on the streets of Wupian County, your eyes were about to fall into that woman's chest. How could you care about her face? Amitba. Thing, you've said this more than 80 times. Actually, I just happened to glance at that benefactress, but I really forgot about her after just one glance. It's absolutely true. A monk doesn't lie. The most annoying thing is that you baldies keep repeating Amitba all day long. Stupid Nanbei, let me ask you, before I heard the disciple of the abbot's disciple from our neighbor, the little baldy's disciple of the big baldy's disciple of the old baldy's master, he said that reciting Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva in an instant is better than reciting Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva in 100 tribulations, and reciting Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva in one great tribulation is not as good as reciting Amitba. Hey, I have not become a Buddha yet. I don't know. Then tell me, if someone asks you about this Dharma, what do you think? If that's the case, I will only say what is in my heart. I will say that Amitba is already full of fruit and transcends all positions. However, Bodhisattva does not belong to the land of Buddha and is not full of fruit. However, this does not mean that there will be a great difference in merit if you recite the two separately. Master said that Buddhism is not the same as officialdom. It does not pay attention to the size of one's backing. It is about being free. Tathagata Buddha, Tathagata Buddha, Tathagata Buddha, Tathagata Buddha. Doesn't that mean you did not say anything? Ha! The two Zen temples had two Zen. The little monks of the north and south only had one Zen. Buddhism emphasized 3 conversions. Conversion to Buddha, conversion to Dharma, and conversion to monks. However, Wu Nanbei felt that he had one more conversion. North and South converted to East and West. Wherever she was, that was his land of Buddhism. Then he felt a little guilty. It had been a long time since he bought rouge. The little monk touched his bald head and frowned. He sighed softly. He probably could not become a Buddha in the eyes of the world. Chapter 12:27. Dian Xiongzong looked at the beautiful scenery of the Miao Stockade village. The terraced fields spread up the mountain, the green water at the foot of the mountain like a ribbon, and the stilted buildings were clustered together. It was hard to imagine that this was the scenery that the Central Plain scholars talked about. However, Dian Xiongzong was a rough man. Moreover, he did not come all the way south to enjoy the scenery. He had seen dozens of such isolated stockades, and many of them had been turned into ruins by the knives of his subordinates. Dian Xiongzong looked back at the silent army behind him and grinned, revealing his yellow teeth that spoiled the scenery. He withdrew his gaze and carefully looked at the general standing beside him. In today's world, there were countless meritorious generals, and there were even more in the Beiliang army. However, in Dian Xiongzong's mind, there were only 2 people who deserved the title of general. The great general Su Shao had passed away, and the only one alive was the one beside him. As for Gu Jianteng, Lu Xingxiang, and the others, they were just passable. The old men like Yan Zhenchuan and Yang Shenxing were even worse. Dian Xiongzong withdrew his thoughts and did not give orders. Since leaving Shu, more than 60 people had developed enough tacit understanding and should have known what they were doing. Moreover, not to mention King Fu Tao, Wu Huyen, and Bai Hen, who were real high-ranking generals, none of them were really ordinary soldiers. Any one of them was a person who could not be underestimated in the officialdom of Shu. Before leaving Shu, there were also some fearless troublemakers who were unruly and difficult to tame. Weren't they also convinced that they were more obedient than his wife? Along the way, from the initial mutual suspicion and contempt, to the end, everyone took the lead, everyone was wounded, and everyone regarded each other as fellow soldiers who could exchange their lives. It seemed unimaginable, but Dian Xiongzong was not surprised at all because this was the invincibility of the person he followed. That person's military strategy had always been very simple. It was nothing more than two kinds of generals and soldiers. He had not been in Shu for long, so he did not go around buying people's hearts and building relationships. He just pulled this group of young and strong generals, who he privately said were not yet terminally ill, to the chaotic territory of the old Nanzhao to harvest people's heads and teach them how to kill people with their own hands. Finally, when they were free, they could figure out how to lead troops to kill people in the future. Dian Xiongzong had followed him for many years. Logically speaking, he understood all the principles. Even if it was a military book that he had personally written, he could still brace himself and recite a few thousand words. However, he was exactly the same as all the direct subordinates under his command. He knew what to do, but he could not do it well. Dian Xiongzong sometimes drank and chatted with Wei Fuzi, who liked to babble on and on about profound and unfathomable words. Over time, Dian Xiongzong was too lazy to think about it. In any case, he only believed in one point. Following the general to break through enemy lines and kill the enemy, his side would only win the battle without any suspense. The difference was only the size of the battle results. Probably sensing that Dian Xiongzong had been staring at him for a long time, that person turned his head and cast a questioning gaze. Dian Xiongzong, who was now the commander-in-chief of the Western Shu army and also the general of Bazhou, chuckled and asked, "General, that boy's surname Su is, in any case, the dragon son of the previous emperor of Western Shu. He must have masters protecting him at his side. How about letting me make a move to satisfy my cravings?" That person smiled, neither agreeing nor refusing. Dian Xiongzong immediately blushed. He knew that this idea was definitely dashed. Moreover, he did not have the courage to continue pleading. The general had always been like this. The rules he set could not be broken even by the heavenly emperor. During this training, other than the soldiers, and the people like them who had temporarily become pawns, the general himself had never made a move, regardless of whether the battle was good or bad. But then again, if the general was willing to make a move, what could those people do? Thinking of this, Dian Xiongzong's heart was somewhat resentful. Let's not talk about how much of the #1 in the world title that you snatched from Wang Xianji's hands. Do you really think you can withstand the iron hooves of the Beimang coming south? Dian Xiongzong seemed to have forgotten that if someone had told him that His Royal Highness could become a martial arts expert, he would rather believe that he was a woman who could give birth to children. When His Royal Highness went to Mount Wudong to cultivate, whether it was him, the teacher Wei Fuqing, or a group of Beiliang generals, they had all ridiculed him. In all likelihood, this kid had taken a fancy to a beautiful Taoist nun on Mount Wudong. Practicing the blade was not too clever of a cover. Ani General Fu Tao, Shaolai General Wang Chaowu, and Shuzhou Deputy General Huyan Wanwan were respectively nicknamed Prince Consort, Foolish Young Master, and Tiger Eater. The three of them had completely different natures, but without exception, they were wholeheartedly convinced by that taciturn man. Wang Chaowu came from a noble family. In his free time, he could speak freely with that person, talking about books, gold, stone, and exegesis. It was not strange that the martial arts fanatic Huyan Wanwan could talk about martial arts with that person. However, Fu Tao was famous for his unsociable temperament, yet he could chat happily with that person. In any case, Dian Xiongnu was not surprised. The general seemed to have never lost a battle in his life. On the battlefield, the Liang court and common people all knew of his military exploits. In the field of love, wasn't it the same? He had just arrived at the Western Shu Road, and he had already been praised by the Rouge for his beauty, xie, and love at first sight. As for the officialdom, even His Majesty the Emperor held the general in high esteem. As soon as he entered the capital, he made the general the Minister of War. Currently, he was the Shuang Lu of the Ministry of War. Lu Baijia and Lu Xingxiang were only assistant ministers. How could they compare to their own general? In the Miao stockade village near the mountains and rivers, when they saw the brazen intrusion of this army, almost all of the Miao people knew that they were in a dead end. These Miao people, who were supposed to be isolated from the world, had unexpectedly taken out swords and armors from nowhere. Most of these armed people were old. When they were young, it happened that the spring and autumn war happened to put the people of the Central Plains into a terrible situation. Many young children and young women were confused. They did not know why their fathers and husbands suddenly had those shiny weapons. Some white-haired old Miao people even put on rusty armors. If it was not for this unforeseen event, the former would probably never know that this secret was hidden in the stockade. After all, the stockade village was not the kind of military town that was used to seeing the smoke of war and hearing the sound of horse hooves. When faced with the emergence of this group of Western Shu elites, they were completely defenseless. Before they appeared at the foot of the stockade village, some of the Miao people who had just returned from work were shot dead on the spot. The arrows either pierced through their chests or through their skulls. Almost all of them died in a face-to-face confrontation. At most, they could only turn their backs and did not even have the time to take a step back. The most terrifying thing was that these armored soldiers did not speak before and after they killed the Miao people. After they killed the Miao people, the person who fired the crossbow only silently pulled out the arrow from the corpse and put it back into the quiver. In the middle of this, there was a young couple of Miao people who were whispering sweet nothings to each other by the river. The young man was an agile expert in this stockade village. He had once fought with a ferocious tiger with his bare hands. However, when one of the tall armored soldiers raised his crossbow, even though he had a sharp sense of smell and was about to pounce on the Miao woman to avoid the arrow seemed to have been expected. It killed two birds with one stone. It directly pierced through the foreheads of the man and woman, causing them to die together with their love. This group of devils who killed without batting an eyelid began to climb the mountain and enter the stockade village unhurriedly. Chapter 1228. What made the Miao people feel even more chilled was the way these armored soldiers killed. It was a coldness that they had never imagined before. These armored soldiers were like an old farmer who was skilled in farming and harvesting rice. They knew how to use the most effortless method to harvest the rice, not a bit more and not a bit less. In the face of the first batch of Miao people who seemed to have the advantage in terms of numbers, they first used light crossbows to kill. If they were to get close to them, they would draw their swords and kill them cleanly with one stab. There was absolutely nothing fancy about it. If someone was lucky enough to escape the first stab and both parties brushed past each other, the armored soldiers holding swords would not break the advancing formation and fight with them. Instead, they would boldly and confidently let the armored soldiers beside them or behind them deliver the second stab. When more than 40 Miao people were dead, no one could escape the second stab. This scene was not too bloody and could even be said to be very clean. However, it made the second batch of more than 60 Miao people feel as if their guts were about to burst. They stopped at the edge of the lushing field in the stronghold. Behind them were more than 30 Miao people who were relatively weak. After these two batches of Miao men went out to fight the enemy, there were only the elderly, women and children who were destined to wait for death. The armored soldiers holding crossbows and swords slowly entered the lushing field that was paved with cobblestones. The two batches of Miao people were already crowded together. One of them was a white-haired old Miao man who was holding an iron spear. He took a few steps forward. The old man might have traveled the Central Plains when he was young and knew a little of the official language. However, when the old man opened his mouth to speak, a crossbow arrow was directly nailed into his mouth. His entire body was hit by the huge penetrating force and fell backward. After the old man with the crossbow arrow in his mouth fell to the ground, the tip of the well-made crossbow hit the ground. It was like a rice seedling in a paddy field being pulled up by someone. The Miao people were pale. It was not only Dian Xiongzong and the three generals who were indifferent to this. In fact, all of the Shishu military officers, including the armored soldier who shot the crossbow, felt that this kind of killing without hesitation was right and proper. If it was said that each of them had their own conceited arrogance and leadership style before that person was conferred the title of king, but under that person's tepid training, they all understood one thing. Following him in battle, whether it was a battle with a high chance of winning or a low chance of winning, in the end, it was all about killing people. Killing people was not written by literati. There was no need to talk about beautiful words or colorful brocade. It had to be concise and practical. Conciseness was under the premise of ensuring practicality and effectiveness. In order to save the physical strength of each soldier, the entire military force would be raised to the extreme bit by bit. In this way, the situation would be as stable as a rock. In a battle where they might lose, they could slowly recover from the disadvantage. In a battle where they were sure to win, they would be in an invincible position from the beginning. In this trip to the south, that person could not be said to have spoken, let alone have any actions of teaching. There were only a few words at the beginning of the Shu War, but it was more and more memorable. I will let you all understand what a general and a military officer should do and should not do. In the future, you all will let your subordinates know what to do and what not to do in a battle. In less than 5 years, give me 200,000 soldiers in Shishu, and I will give all of you a name that will go down in history. Now, the proud and arrogant prince consort Fu Tao believed, the scholarly general Wang Chao believed, the valiant general Huyen Shui believed, and all of the military officers who accompanied him believed. Because at this time, the person who was looking up at a stilted building high up in the sky was that person. In the place where he was looking, behind the railing of the stilted building in the Miao village, which was nicknamed Beauty's Leaning, there was clearly no one there. But behind the door and window, there was a young man wearing clothes different from the Miao people's through a gap in the window, staring at the man who, coincidentally, looked up. The young man was not that old. Sweat seeped out of his forehead, his lips trembled, and he muttered to himself, even if Mount Tai collapses in front of me, my expression will not change. For him, it was too much to hope for. After he passed through Beimang and Shishu all the way from Beiliang and Shishu to Nanzhao, he often had the feeling that it was a lifetime ago. Occasionally, when he opened his eyes in the morning and was half awake, he would still feel that he was lying on the hard little bed in his home in Beimang. Even though he had confirmed that he was the crown prince of Shishu who was in a foreign land, the son of the emperor who was shakily kneeled and choked with sobs when they met, it was difficult for him to treat the so-called Shu kingdom as his own country and as his home. This unremarkable young man's real name was Su Ying. His father was the emperor of Shu. His uncle was the famous Shishu sword emperor who guarded the gates of the country to his death. However, in the end, he only felt that calling himself Su Su was a bit easier to say, and also a bit more relaxed and comfortable. He was just a small figure who spent his days wandering around that small city in northern Mang, daydreaming that even he himself felt was comical. So after he came to Nanzhao with her, other than reluctantly socializing with those old nobles who were unreachable a decade ago, he liked to take her outside to relax and breathe. She, who was blind, never refused. She carried the Guqin and walked the Jianghu with him, the Jianghu in his heart. He said that he wanted to be a hero the most in his life. She said yes. Then she personally helped him buy a peerless sword that a hero should have. She helped him dress up like a son of an aristocratic family. She taught him how to speak when he was doing justice and how to pretend to be an expert. She would be the demoness who killed people like scything flax, and he would be the hero who defeated the demon. The two of them carefully acted out 4 or 5 plays in Nanzhao. She killed a total of more than 200 people who should have died, and he made a grand appearance under the gazes of many. He either appeared floating on stage while reciting an ancient poem or stood under a tall building and under the moon. The final result, without exception, was the blind demoness who carried the guqin and made the yamen and the legendary demons of Jianghu feel their scalps tingle. Under the fierce attacks of the hero that made bystanders feel all kinds of indescribable mysteries, she fled pathetically and lingered at death's door. Afterwards, he would always meet her secretly and hide with her. He would tell her, who could not see anything in the world, which famous Jianghu master among the bystanders had been struck dumb, and which young heroines had been struck dumb by the sight of it. She always had a tranquil smile and did not speak. Su Su looked at the man who seemed to have sensed where she was standing and said in a trembling voice, "I know, even if you are about to enter the realm of celestial phenomenon, you can't beat him." The blind guqin player who had almost taken Su Fengnian's life in the rainy alley grunted, his expression calm. Su Su turned her head and looked at him. She smiled bitterly and said, "They are definitely coming for me. My life is worth it anyway, it's not a loss. No matter how they find me, there is no meaning in talking about this. You can go." Xue Songguan still grunted. Then she moved away, pushed open the door and walked out. At this moment, Su Su felt a little sad. Husband and wife were birds in the same forest, but when disaster came, they flew separately. But she was still not his wife. If she was, how good would that be? Then even if she left alone, he would be willing. Suddenly, Su Su woke up and madly rushed out of the room. Then he saw her float away and land in the lushing field, standing in front of the armored soldiers. Su Su suddenly cried and laughed. This young man who had been as timid as a mouse in a foreign country for more than 20 years, this young hero who had stupidly sprained his ankle in their play not long ago, was full of heroism for the first time. He leaned against the railing and yelled at the top of his lungs. "Wife, wait for me." But Xue Songguan did not allow his heroism to reach the clouds for too long. She pulled off the cotton cloth wrapped around the guqin and lightly plucked a string. Su Su, who was leaning behind the beauty, immediately fainted. Then she, who was blind, turned her head and looked back. She only felt some regret. Everyone said that the Chu Sanren had died. She could not see, he could not hear. Chapter 1229. Huyan Swan, who loved to cook the brains of tigers, frowned. The Yuzhou deputy general, whose stature was the shortest among the many Shu armored soldiers, did not look at the blind zither player who had walked right into the trap. Instead, he pointed at the railing of the stilted building. Then, Dian Xiongzhao saw a thin, short, and childlike shadow suddenly dash out, carrying away the Western Shu crown prince who had fainted. It ran along the railing of the railing, and just as it was about to leap out of the stilted building, Huyan Swan's Shu knife nailed into a pillar. The handle of the knife instantly sank into the pillar. The black shadow carrying Su Su twisted its body into a deformed position as it charged forward, barely dodging Huyan Swan's throwing knife. Carrying Su Su, it directly broke through the railing and charged into the sky outside the building. In an instant, a torrent of crossbow bolts unfolded on the lushing field. The blind zither player, Xue Songguan, tilted her head slightly. She plucked a string, as if adjusting the tone. The dozens of powerful crossbow bolts shattered in the air. Then, the female zither player bent her pinky finger, hooking the first string with a powerful and respected sound. The string drew a beautiful arc, but it never fell. At the same time, her left thumb fiercely drew the remaining 6 strings. The prince consort, Fu Tao, and the southern Tang's old young master, Wang Daowu, stepped out at the same time, each chopping out a knife. Countless fine cracks appeared on the knife's edge. Xue Songwan still had her head lowered. Her bent fingers suddenly straightened, and the taut string arc immediately bounced back. The female zither player's right hand retracted and shook her sleeve. She slapped down on all the surface of the string. The entire cobblestone lushing field, with her as the center, began to rapidly crack outwards. Of the Shu-armored soldiers, Huyen Xuan was the vanguard, the only one who did not retreat but instead advanced. This short and small general, who no longer had a knife in his hand, lowered his head and bent his waist, directly pulling out Dian Xiongzao's knife. With a sinister smile on his face, he strode 3 zhang away with a single step. When his foot landed, the tip of his foot tapped against the ground, and he moved horizontally. The cobblestone he landed on completely exploded. Afterwards, Huyen Xuan tilted his head, a flower of blood immediately blossoming from his ear. Huyen Xuan, who had a piece of his ear sliced off by the formless zither sound, was not angry. Instead, he laughed and continued to charge forward. After charging for several steps, his body flipped sideways in the air. Behind him, about 50 zhang away, Dian Xiongzao extended his palm. It was as if he had snapped a zither string. The disorderly broken string still left several marks on his armor. Dian Xiongzao did not pay attention to the bloodstains on his palm. His eyes stared at the young and blind zither player, clicking his tongue in wonder. It was impossible for every general to be a match for tens of thousands of people, nor did it need to be so. Just like Dian Xiongnu, who was recognized as having outstanding martial arts strength, was actually just a level 2 expert. Even if his ability to command an army was not taken into account, in terms of breaking through enemy lines, perhaps all the level 2 experts in Jianghu were not as lethal as Dian Xiongnu. After all, in Jianghu, there were few absurd scenes of people ganging up on each other. However, breaking through enemy lines and killing enemies was different. It required a warrior's ability to listen carefully and observe all directions. However, there were also outliers among the generals in the army. Su Longxiang, who had made a name for himself in the Battle of Beimang, was one of them. Chen Jibao, Yuan Zuozong, and other famous generals from the spring and autumn period were one of them. Huyen Mon and the temporarily unknown young man Che Yi were also one of them. Especially the last two. Everything was ready except for the east wind. What they lacked was a huge battlefield enough for them to perform on the stage. In the Liang imperial court, in terms of seniority, it was as difficult as ascending to the sky to stand out. One could only rely on one's endurance. The woman whose appearance could only be considered delicate and pretty did indeed have the style of a grandmaster who could hold back 10,000 men. Even when facing these arrogant and valiant generals who had the advantage in numbers, from beginning to end, she had a calm and indifferent expression. Even when Huyen Mon's blade was less than 3 zhang away from her, she still did not show the slightest bit of impatience. She did not even raise her head to look at Huyen Mon. She held the zither in one hand and opened her other hand, palm facing upwards, reaching under the zither strings. Her thumb and middle finger clasped the inner and outer strings, as if she was holding water with one hand. Her voice was light and her face carried a slight smile as she said, "A spoonful of water contains the taste of the sea, a flower blooms into heaven and earth." The tip of Huyen Mon's blade was only 3 inches away from the zither. When the blind zither player gently released 2 fingers, as if he did not dare to be greedy and continue fighting, his body suddenly stopped. However, it was still too late. Huyen Mon's refined armor instantly turned into fine powder. This valiant general was bathed in blood. At this moment, from the corner of his eye, he glimpsed the scene of the stilted building in the distance. Gritting his teeth, he gripped his blade with both hands. With an angry shout, he rushed towards the blind woman. Xue Songwan turned around. For the first time, her entire person radiated with the decisive demeanor of someone who was willing to risk their life for another. However, her target was not Huyan, who was similarly staking everything on a single throw, but the man who was floating and blocking Su's path. From the beginning to the end, this man did not pay any attention to her. In a flash, he stood on the roof of a slightly lower stilted building, coincidentally blocking the black shadow and Su's path of retreat. Shui Songguan allowed Huyan's blade to strike her shoulder. Her 10 fingers pressed down on the zither strings, and the roof beneath the man's feet collapsed with a loud bang. The sound of the zither was silent, but the man did not move at all. Shui Songguan quietly sighed. She extended a finger and broke a zither string. She gently flicked it towards the man. Huyan, who had been ignored to the side, angrily drew his blade and scolded, "Bitch, you dare to look down on your master Huyan." Shui Songguan, who had broken a zither string with her own hands, broke the remaining 5 strings in succession. She used the power of each string to block the 5 sharp blades that Huyan sent out from behind her. However, no matter how confident Shui Songguan was in front of Shu generals like Huyan and Fushi, the difference between her and that man's realm was like the difference between her and Dian Xiong, Fu Tao, and the other generals. There was an insurmountable gap between them. Her fingers pressed on the last string of the zither, wanting to break it. The man stood in the air. He grabbed Su's shoulder with one hand and strangled the black shadow's neck with the other. This was the first time the latter had appeared in the world. He was an old dwarf who weighed no more than 60 jin. Shui Songguan did not dare to break the strings anymore. The moment she broke the strings, Su and the old senior man she would die. Chapter 12:30. The next moment, the man returned to the corridor and gently put down Su and the old man. He did not seem to want to kill them. Shui Songguan was puzzled. She leaped up and stepped on the roofs of the bamboo buildings with her zither in hand. She stood on the other side of the fence and faced the man. However, Shui Songguan knew very well that this was a futile effort. Even if there were 3 of her, she would not be a match for this man. Even if the blacksmith who had once forged a sword for the Sword Emperor of West Shu was here, it would be meaningless to join forces with the dwarf senior who was pretending to be dead and was known as the master of the 36 barbarian streams. The majestic man glanced at the old man who was curled up on the ground. He smiled and said, "Senior Mengu, don't you think it's a bit outrageous to pretend to be a grandson in front of a junior like me?" The dwarf old man closed his eyes and muttered, "Whoever is better at martial arts is the grandpa. Just treat me as a grandson who is already dead. Don't bother about me." Huyan Swan, who had been infuriated by the blind zither player, stepped on the roof and rushed over. He jumped up high and was about to attack when the man calmly said, Stop." Huyan Swan stretched out his hand and grabbed the eads, hanging in the air. His entire body was covered in a thick stench of blood and hostility. However, after the man spoke, he obediently retracted his saber and gently landed on the beauty's back. He squatted down and sulked. The man looked at the female zither player and spread his hands. "Wake him up. I have something to say." Shui Songguan hesitated for a moment. She walked forward and gently woke Su up. Su, who was still in a daze, finally understood the situation. He stood up and stood in front of Shui Songguan to protect her. He said in a trembling voice, "If you want to kill me, do it to me. It has nothing to do with her." The dwarf old man, who was playing dead on the ground, could not help but roll his eyes. It was really embarrassing to be such a brat's follower. If it were not for Zhao Dingxiu, that old bastard, begging him, he would not have been willing to get involved in this mess. Back then, he had almost pulled out the tendons of that man-cat and skinned him. He really did not want to have anything to do with the experts of the Central Plains anymore. What's more, this bullshit crown prince of Shishu was also a disappointment. How was he worthy of serving and risking his life? He was timid and short-sighted. All he knew was to wander around and pretend to be a hero. He didn't do any proper work and just muddled along. Shishu might as well not have such a crown prince who returned to his hometown in glory from Beimang. Then, Su Su asked a question that made Huyan's face twitch. Who are you? The man was stunned for a moment before he chuckled and said, Chenji Bao. Su Su was so scared that he took a step back. His legs were weak. Fortunately, Shui Songguan supported him, so he did not collapse on the ground. He was the villain too from the Great War of Spring and Autumn. He was the white-clothed soldier Immortal mentioned by the current emperor. He was Gu Jintang's descendant, Liu Baijia's predecessor, the minister of war of the Liang dynasty. He was now the king of Shu. Chen Jibao turned to look at the foot of the mountain and said indifferently, the reason why I didn't kill you, Su Su, is because I want to do business with Zhao Dingshu. This business was originally done with you by Beiliang, but after I was conferred the title of king of Shishu, I cut off the connection between you two. Beiliang is now at most sending you some money secretly. Don't even think about passing through the Shu border. Since Beiliang broke the promise first, you can't be blamed for breaking the promise later. Moreover, your life is in my hands. This old man Zhao would not hesitate to do this business if he was here. Su Su gathered his courage and asked, you mean to say that you want us to abandon Su Fengnian and start a rebellion in Nanzhao according to your wishes? Speaking until here, Su Su sneered and said, Bah, it's true that my martial arts are not good, but I'm not an ungrateful person. The dwarf old man whose life was hanging by a thread was so angry that he jumped up and gave this idiot a slap. Then, he continued to lie on the ground with his limbs in the air. He did not forget to say angrily, if you want to die, then die. Don't implicate your grandpa Mengdu. Chen Jibao chuckled and said, ungrateful. Su Su did not know where his courage came from. He straightened his neck and said with a red face, I don't like Su Fengnian, and I don't like people like you even more. Chen Jibao did not argue with him. He said to himself, in this world, there are differences between public and private affairs. Just like these Miao people sheltering you, the crown prince of a fallen country, because they were indebted to this old man Zhao for not killing them. This is an eye for an eye. Thinking about it, before they die, they still owe you, Su Su. Chen Jibao ordered, Chu Hu Her, go and kill them. Kill them all. Huyan Swan carried his knife and left. Soon, the Miao stockade village was filled with cries and blood splattered everywhere. Chen Jibao did not look at Su Su who was gritting his teeth. He asked, as long as you say to stop, I can make them stop. Su Su was in a dilemma. He closed his eyes and did not dare to look at the Miao people who were drinking with him yesterday. Now, they were lying in a pool of blood. The young and strong Miao people in the stockade were almost all dead. Next would be the defenseless women and the elderly. Su Su turned his head and looked at Shui Songguan in a daze. He asked helplessly, will the headmaster agree? The blind female zither player wanted to say something but stopped. Su Su lowered his head and said sadly, yes, as long as we can restore the country, the headmaster will definitely agree. Chen Jibao said calmly, I promise you, in the future, you can call yourself a king in other places except for Shishu. Su Su sobbed, what does this have to do with me? I have never thought about restoring the country. I have never thought about those unreachable dynasties. Chen Jibao laughed, unreachable. Because of your mistake, another 37 Miao people have died, and the number of deaths will continue to increase. If you, Su Su, are a useless person who does not care about great kindness and righteousness, then you don't even care about small kindness and righteousness. Su Su raised his head and roared, stop. Chen Jibao smiled and was indifferent. Su Su rushed to Chen Jibao with red eyes. He raised his fist and punched, I asked you to stop, did you hear me? Without Chen Jibao making a move, Su Su flew out and was caught in Shui Songguan's arms. Chen Jibao raised his arm and the killing in the village stopped. Chen Jibao narrowed his eyes and looked into the distance. He said sarcastically, "If I said that Zhao Dingxiu found me a month ago and wanted to abandon Beiliang and form an alliance with me, would you believe me?" Su Su, with blood seeping out of the corner of his mouth, said in a daze, "Impossible, impossible." Chen Jibao did not look at Su Su. He looked at Xue Songguan. "Go and tell Zhao Dingxiu that I agree. Shi Shu will give you 30,000 soldiers and horses in half a year. Within a year, you can either eat up Nanzhao and then sit down to talk, or be eaten by me." Xue Songguan was expressionless and nodded. She helped Su Su away from the beauty seat. The dwarf old man who had escaped death chuckled and stood up. He patted his butt and was about to leave. But a voice came from behind him, "Menggu, when someone accompanied the late emperor on a tour of Shuzhou, you seem to have called him Lame Su when you tried to assassinate him." The old man stopped and did not dare to move. He laughed dryly, "I've long forgotten about the past. King of Shu, you are a magnanimous person. Just let me go like a fart, okay?" The next moment, Chen Jibao held Menggu's head in one hand. The old man's headless body collapsed in the corridor. Chen Jibao threw the head in his hand into the distance and laughed. Chen Jibao, real name Chen Jibao. What a good way to repay kindness. Chapter 1231. The northern Liang of the northwest border had always had the world's fastest saber, the strongest crossbow, the best horse, and the strongest wine. Unfortunately, a few years ago, there had never been a top master here. Hong Shixiang of Wudong had only appeared briefly, and Li Chungang, who had made a comeback, was not a native of the northern Liang. At that time, Chen Jibao and Su Yanbing had not even entered the martial arts role. It was not until the new prince of Liang, Su Fengnian, appeared out of nowhere. He first entered the martial arts role, and then killed Wang Xianji in the territory of the northern Liang that the people of Liang Jianghu believed that the rise of the Fish Dragon Gang was just an impromptu stroke by Su Fengnian. As Su Fengnian showed his outstanding strength in Liang, the Beiliang Frontier Army and the Liang Temple changed the most. It was not the Beiliang Frontier Army or the Liang Temple, but the people in Liangzhou who had personally experienced His Royal Highness's debauchery. For example, the brothels where he had drunk wine, the shops where he had rewarded money, and even the fortune-tellers who dared to call themselves eminent monks when they shaved their heads and called themselves Taoist masters when they put on Taoist robes. They all swore that they had seen the new prince of Liang's talent. Especially the brothels where they had received Su Fengnian and Li Hanlin. They couldn't wait to worship the chairs in the rooms where His Royal Highness had slept in. The women who had been lucky enough to accompany these young masters to drink were even more valuable. The only fly in the ointment was that after Su Fengnian became the king of Beiliang, he had not visited any of the brothels in the city. As for the large group of playboys in Liangzhou city who had been beaten by the king of Beiliang, they were all arrogant when they went out. They all thought that they had fought with the most powerful person in the world. Who dared to say that they were from Jianghu in front of them? Could they fight with any of the 10 people in the martial arts list in their lifetime? Although the world had heard that the king of Beiliang had killed old monster Wang, who had dominated Jianghu for 60 years, those were all rumors. No one knew how invincible this new martial emperor was. Therefore, when they heard that the two figures would appear in the elixir seed field in the northeast corner of Liangzhou city, they all rushed to the field. The origin of the elixir seed field had always been the evidence of His Royal Highness' absurd behavior. He spent a lot of money to build it for Jianghu people to compete in martial arts. In Liangzhou city, where every inch of land was expensive, the elixir seed field was 500 feet long and wide. If one looked down at the city from Mount Qingliang, they could clearly see this large piece of empty space. It was said that at that time, His Royal Highness, who was whimsical, had drunk tea in the provincial governor's mansion for half a day in order to promote the construction of the elixir seed field. Only then did the provincial governor have to take the risk of being beheaded and use 400,000 taels of military pay to build the elixir seed field. For so many years, the elixir seed field had been a place for Jianghu people to show off their skills. Not to mention Jianghu experts, even level 2 masters didn't want to go there to show off. Over time, the elixir seed field became a playground for the children from the rich and powerful families. It was very suitable for flying kites and riding bamboo horses. However, this time, it seemed that they were serious. When the Wu family's cavalry was about to die, the king of Beiliang was going to compete with an unknown swordsman who was over 100 years old. Suddenly, there was a commotion. On the way to the elixir seed field, countless rumors were spread. Some said that the unknown swordsman with snow-white eyebrows was the family head of the Wu family's sword tomb. Some said that the old swordsman was one of the 4 disciples of Wang Xianji who defeated Lin Ye and the groom. Some said that the king of Beiliang agreed to the battle to win a smile from a beauty. As for why he moved the venue from the king's mansion to the elixir seed field, it was because a certain concubine was good at managing her household. She felt that fighting on Mount Qingliang would damage the tide listening pavilion. Because the old swordsman with long eyebrows and one arm arrived at the elixir seed field first, the king of Beiliang didn't arrive quickly. Instead, he rode an inconspicuous carriage and left slowly. This gave the well-informed citizens enough time to watch the battle. Sui Xiagu, who was the first to arrive at the elixir seed field, stood at the upper left corner of the training ground. His snow-white eyebrows fluttered in the wind. The old man stretched out 2 fingers and stroked one of his eyebrows. He didn't look nervous at all. The old man turned a blind eye to the crowd outside the field. His expression was calm, but he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He thought that he could resist the urge to fight, but it seemed that he couldn't be as calm as still water after fighting that brat. This was the last battle of his life, and the title of the strongest fighter in the world, no one else but him. It wasn't that Su Fengnian would be stronger than Dong Tai's sword and Tuoba's fists. It was just that Sui Xiagu had been a nobody in Jianghu for more than 100 years. When he was about to die, he felt that there was no harm in ending the battle with a world-famous battle. Regardless of the outcome, it would be good to let the world know that there was once an old man surnamed Sui who had exchanged an arm with Li Chungang and had suffered countless swords. Coincidentally, when the 2 of them were at daggers drawn, a little girl entered their field of vision and subtly eliminated the thick killing intent that had reached the peak of both sides. Sui Xiagu went with the flow and wanted to fight Su Fengnian to his heart's content in a more conspicuous place. Su Fengnian thought for a while and chose the elixir seed field in the city. Sui Xiagu had no objections. In a carriage, they stared at each other. Su Fengnian's ancient sword, Shu Dao, was placed horizontally on his knees. The future concubine of Beiliang, the head of the literary circle, stared with her eyes wide open. Wang Chudong stared hard at her husband who she had fallen in love with at first sight. Her small face was overflowing with color. She felt a little guilty and carefully asked, "Did I appear at the wrong time?" Su Fengnian's expression was gentle. He stretched out his hand and rubbed her head. He smiled and said, "You are always a timely rain for me." Wang Chudong tilted her head with a puzzled expression. Su Fengnian explained, "There are too many things to worry about in a life and death battle with Senior Sui at Tide Listening Lake. More or less, my hands and feet are tied." Wang Chudong frowned and waved her fists. She said angrily, "Why do these old Jianghu seniors always like to find you to fight and kill? They don't have any respect for their elders." Su Fengnian couldn't help but laugh. "It can't be helped. Even after a few decades, there's still that much of a difference in seniority between us. It's not a year more, not a year less." Su Fengnian reached out his hand to touch the ancient scabbard of the Shu Dao sword and lamented, "In the Jianghu, in the final analysis, it is nothing more than seeking freedom. In addition to that, there is no second place in martial arts, so it is inevitable that there will be fighting and killing. I am considered to be in a good situation." Wang Xianji was even more helpless in those 60 years. There was a scholar with the surname Xia in the capital city who wanted to trap him in the Eastern Sea Martial Emperor city. Wang Xianji himself did not want to leave and could only wait there to be challenged. In more than 60 years, there were close to 1,400 big and small fights. Wang Chudong hesitated for a moment and finally couldn't help but ask softly, "Why didn't you bring Sister Lu out with you?" Su Fengnian was stunned and speechless. He seemed to have never had this thought. He always felt that she should stay in the courtyard on Mount Qingliang, day after day, year after year, treating her respectfully as a guest. Wang Chudong was simple, but she wasn't stupid. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to write The First Snow, which was about love between men and women. It was precisely because of her pure heart that she could point out the heart of others. She lowered her head and said, "Does this count as a crying child getting candy? Sister Lu is more sensible than me, so it's easy for you to forget her. I don't think this is good." Su Fengnian was silent. After Wang Chudong mentioned it, he remembered many trivial things. He seemed to remember that he seemed to have promised to take her around Beiliang. If there was a chance, he would play a few rounds of chess with her. He would take her to the mountain to knock 108 bells. Most of these promises were unintentional at the time. After she'd married Beiliang, she became famous in Wutongan. She was decisive in dealing with family matters. Su Fengnian unconsciously regarded Lu Qingyan as a woman who could work with him to achieve great things. He had already quietly regarded her as a virtuous wife who would never complain. As for Lu Qingyan, after she died, she was indeed smooth and slick in dealing with people. It was probably just as Wang Chudong said, Lu Qingyan was a woman who didn't cry. Su Fengnian was a bit absent-minded. For some reason, he thought of the first time he met Lu Qingyan at the Spring God Lake. She was very warm, slightly utilitarian and worldly. Perhaps because of this, Su Fengnian didn't care much about her. What he cared about was even less than the cat-holding woman who chose to stay in Shangyin Academy. Su Fengnian chuckled and said, "If I can withstand the Northern Mang cavalry's advance south, then the things I promised her, I will do them all." In the Beiliang Palace on Mount Qingliang, there was a private courtyard. The inner hall was dark. A young woman who was prophesied by a fortune-teller before she married Su Fengnian, a match made in heaven, quietly lit a green lamp. This was the second time she lit the lamp wick. The first time, it was Wang Xianji who died. This time, it was Wuxia Valley who started the fight. The name of the lamp in exchange for a life. My life in exchange for his. Chapter 1232. Autumn had arrived in the north and south of the great river. Cicadas in autumn were hanging on the trees, making their final screeches. Their noise was truly annoying. Spring was high on the branches, autumn was low on the branches. The word worry rose and fell, and filled one's heart. In the late autumn of the first year of Xiangfu, the smoke of war once again rose in the central plains, causing many old people who had experienced the war of the spring and autumn period to tremble with fear. Especially the Guangling Road, whose territory was second only to the southern border, the flames of war continued without any signs of extinguishing. In the history of Liang officials, Dechu became West Chu, Divine Phoenix City was renamed Dingding City, and now those historians had even thought of a new wording, West Chu was changed to later Chu. Even if the Liang Imperial Court, which had become the rightful ruler of the world, did not start the war unsuccessfully, they still did not think that this group of ghosts, who should have gone with the wind along with the spring and autumn period, could really achieve great things. In fact, as long as the second pillar after Su Shao, Gu Jiantang did not change his position and did not withdraw from the northern border to the south, it meant that the situation was still in the hands of the imperial court. The woman whose real name was Jiang Si did not leave the city with her uncle. She was currently sitting quietly in this enormous home. Across the stone table was the Grand Preceptor, Sun Shiji, who was reporting the situation of the Eastern Front to her. She was not absent-minded like when she first entered White Deer Cave. Instead, she seriously listened to every word, but she did not make a sound. She did not even think of using her status to criticize the military affairs of the country. Chao Chongqing personally came to the Guangling River and oversaw the Navy flagship. Together with the young General Ko Jianghuai, one on the water and one on the land, the spearhead was directed at the spring snow building of the Prince of Guangling, Zhao Yi. Jiang Si was already used to listening to reports of victory. First, it was the fledgling Pei Sui who joined hands with Xia Shi. Not only did they defend the important town, they also took advantage of the situation and nailed the 40,000 old soldiers of Jinan, led by Yang Xinxing, who had underestimated the enemy, firmly in Qingyang Basin. This was only the first round of the strategy to lure the enemy. Xia Shi very quickly fought a tough battle. Yan Jinchuan's 30,000 elite cavalry of the Yan family were completely annihilated. At the same time, Ko Jianghuai took advantage of the situation and headed east. His military achievements were only slightly inferior to Xia Shi's. He led Zhao Yi's troops by the nose as if he was taking a stroll on the street. One was moving, one was still. The changes in movement and stillness, the combination of strange and normal, were completely out of Li Yang's expectations. According to what the old Grand Tutor had just said, Ko Jianghuai's method of dividing the troops was like an extension of his arm. He had already beaten Zhao Yi's western defensive line like a sieve. The three armies had a total of 60,000 soldiers, and they were separately holed up in Zhaozhuang County, Starport City, and Fire Date Mountain. In addition, the Dechu Navy had greatly intimidated the main force of Zhao Yi's rear, so they did not dare to rashly enter the western front to fill in the holes. The initiative was completely grasped in the hands of Ko Jianghuai. What was left was to see which place this young general would attack first. In the eyes of outsiders, Ko Jianghuai was rather self-respecting with his troops. He had never reported his intentions to the imperial palace and rarely even consulted with Chao Chongqing, who was close by. Regarding this matter, Dechu's 3 provinces and 6 ministries were not without criticism. There were already people who suggested that Xia Shibian, who was more steady in using troops, should be transferred to the eastern front, and then the unruly and difficult to tame Ko Jianghuai should be transferred to the western front. In Dechu's imperial court, the Duke of Huainan Zhao Ying, the King of Jing'an, Zhao Sun, and the other vassal kings of Liang, added together, regardless of whether it was numbers or battle prowess, they could not compare to Zhao Yi, who dared to contend with Beiliang for the #1 army in the world. For this reason, the old man of the Ko family, trembling with fear, took the initiative to come to the imperial palace 2 days ago to present a bramble and ask for punishment. Jiang and I had no choice but to placate him with kind words. She clearly remembered that old imperial tutor's son was clearly an old friend of the Ko family, yet he still fiercely beat the nearly 80-year-old old man of the Ko family to the side. At that time, Jiang and I watched the back of the old man kneeling on the ground after he stood up and turned around, soaked in sweat. She then thought of the imperial court, where even she could see that some of the officials of the 3 provinces and 6 ministries were already beginning to struggle for power. Without her uncle by her side to act as her backbone, she immediately felt a strong sense of powerlessness. The old Grand Preceptor, who seemed to be in good spirits, drank a mouthful of tea to quench his thirst. After he put down the cup, he smiled and said, "This old official knows a little about military affairs, so I don't dare to recklessly guess Ko Jianghuai's next move. However, this old official thinks that as long as we can defeat any one of the 3 prefectures in Zhuangzhuang County, Zhao Yi's lucky general, Songli, will definitely be hard-pressed from the very beginning." Sun Shiji thought for a moment, dipped his finger into the tea, and tapped 3 points on the stone table. At the beginning of summer, old Ko brought Ko Jianghuai to visit us and listen to this young man's opinions. They were all things that had never been mentioned or written in the ancient books. He said that in the future, wars would gradually be inclined to be fought in the wild, and the share of sieges and strongholds would gradually decrease. In short, war is about slowly expanding the overall situation of a country, and nothing more than the essence of the three words, point, line, and surface. Ko Jianghuai said that he valued the line more than anyone else, and that his troops and horses would definitely be the best at rapid transfer and long-distance raids. In this way, even if the overall strength of his side was inferior to the enemy's, at certain critical moments, he would be able to bully the enemy with numbers. He would not fight for meaningless victories, but only seek to defeat the enemy's single large number of elite troops and horses. The old Grand Preceptor was in a good mood. He said, at first, this old official thought that Ko Jianghuai, who had made a name for himself in the Shangyin Academy, was bullying this old official and showing off his knowledge on paper. Now that I think about it carefully, I think that Ko Jianghuai is indeed confident. Sun Shiji smiled and said, I heard that the Spring Snow Building has already issued a death order to Lu Liya at the Fire Date Mountain of the Wuxia Fortress. Once the Fire Date is lost, all the generals above the rank of commandant will have to obediently bring their heads to Zhao Yi even if they manage to escape alive. Chapter 1233. At this point, the old man seemed to have thought of something. He sighed. I also remember something Xie Shibian said. Attacking and defending the enemy is actually attacking the heart. It depends on who can grasp the mentality and the general situation. This makes me have no choice but to mention that Chen Jibao. This person is known as the white-clothed war saint because, other than being skilled at the pinnacle of generals and soldiers, he especially likes to analyze other people's thoughts. In this way, Xie Shibian and Ko Jianghuai are like Chen Jibao's brilliant disciples, each with their own strengths. Of course, as the war progresses, their potential will be excavated even more. As for how high they can reach, it will largely depend on whether or not the civil officials who participate in the court assembly every day drag them down. A eunuch quickly walked into the courtyard and bent over to hand over a 600 li urgent military intelligence report. Then, he bowed and retreated. From beginning to end, he didn't say a word, nor did he show any elaborate etiquette. Sun Shiji, who was used to this, opened the report and saw that it was sent by Chao Chongqing. The old man's face was beaming with joy. He looked at the princess and said with a face full of joy, this Ko Jianghuai is determined to show his strength to this old official who has been gossiping. In addition to Chongqing's words, I reckon that in the short term, no one will dare to say anything in the court assembly. Your Highness, look, Songli clearly wants to take a risk and use the red ditch in front of Fire Date Mountain as bait. He wants to catch Ko Jianghuai, this big fish that appears and disappears like a ghost. At the same time, he wants to use his personal army to go around Red Date Mountain. I think this general would never have thought that Ko Jianghuai would take the bait. However, Songli still didn't have the opportunity to raise his rod. In 3 hours, Ko Jianghuai only used 3 hours to completely wipe out the 4,000 people at Red Ditch. After eating the bait with lightning speed, he quickly retreated 80 li. By the time Songli, whose marching speed was fast enough, arrived at Red Ditch, it would already be too late. Sun Shiji laughed heartily. It's not that this is a big battle, but it's really satisfying to see Songli suffer as soon as he takes office. This is no different from adding fuel to the fire for Spring Snow Building. As for Ko Jianghuai, it was killing 3 birds with 1 stone. He suppressed Song Li's arrogance and took down Red Gutter's forces. At the same time, he also made us speechless. It was no wonder that Chongqing added a sentence in the spy report, the eastern line belongs to Ko, the northern line belongs to Xia. The two of them can deploy troops and do as they please. Do as you please. Jiang and I asked softly, isn't the commander of the southern expedition, Lu Xingxiang, a famous general from the spring and autumn period? There was also the dragon general Su Gong, who was also praised by uncle for being both intelligent and courageous. Why didn't Li Yang use any of them? Moreover, we have Xie Shibian and Ko Jianghuai on our side. Doesn't the enemy camp have such young generals? The old man restrained his smile and patiently said, "This is like the Chinese chess that Huang Sanjia invented. On our side, the Chu's generals and soldiers are clearly spaced apart. They each have their own duties. Those who should break the enemy lines break the enemy lines, and those who should lead the troops lead the troops. However, on the other side of the border, in the Liang imperial court, the Zhao family's Wang is known to have all the talents in the world. The Zhao family's son has too many people that he can use, and they are densely packed together. For example, Lu Xingxiang is at the border, but in front of him, there are Yang Xinqing and Yan Zhenchuan, and then there are the veteran generals from the spring and autumn period. It's not his turn to be the vanguard. As for that Su Gong, his position in the Liang imperial court is even lower than Lu Xingxiang's. He's not an official from the capital, nor is he a veteran general. If he wants to lead an army, he first needs to carve out a path of blood in his own camp." Jiang and I sighed. Listening to the waves of cicadas, she was unable to disguise her annoyance. The old man smiled. He raised his head to look at the evergreen trees that were still green and gloomy in autumn. Then he stood and casually said something before leaving. "The sound of cicadas adds to one's worries. Of course, it's worry that one's intestines are broken." Jiang and I was in a daze and muttered to herself. She didn't want to admit that compared to the home she was in, the only home in the world that could compare to the imperial palace in Great and City, she would often think of that small house on the mountain that belonged to her alone. The summer was hot and the winter was cold. The hard little bed, the mended window, and always silently looked at each other with the tattered quilt of her fellow sufferers. During those years there was not a single word of flattery, only cold words from the odd job workers and maidservants. However, that malice was displayed on everyone's face. She could see and recognize it. Although she hated it, she never felt uncertain in her heart. She didn't need to think about the scheming behind those respectful and solemn faces like now. She didn't need to shoulder the burden on her own shoulders. Occasionally, she would return to the thatched cottage on Wudong Mountain in her dreams. She would dream that she was taking care of the small vegetable garden that was always full of green. She would dream that she was squatting in the vegetable garden and carefully counting the harvest with her fingers. After she was able to fly on the sword, she had seen too many spectacular scenes in the world. However, these scenes were forgotten after she saw them. Many years ago, at this time, a sloppy young man was holding a branch and fiercely slapping a mournful tree. He turned his head to a young girl and said with a mischievous smile, I know. What the hell do you know? Little mud man, do you know?" At this time, Jiang and I subconsciously blurted out, just like in the past. "What the hell do I know?" At that time, the young man held his belly with one hand and pointed at her with the other hand with the branch. He smiled and said, "Little mud man, you know me. If I can't find a wife in the future, you can make up the number. Attend the Shanghai Book Fair signing in the afternoon of the 18th of this month. Location, Shanghai Exhibition Center, number 1000 Yen and Middle Road, Shanghai." Chapter 1234. Qi Shen stood by the window and looked at the beautiful woman who was sitting cross-legged and discussing Tao with infatuated eyes. In the chaos of war, the country's misfortune led to the rise of learning. The Shengyan Academy temporarily accepted many scholars who had fled from the Guangling path across the river. The number of Jixia scholars immediately reached close to 10,000, and for the first time, the number of Jishang scholars broke through 600. This number was even more exaggerated than when the academy was at its peak in the Great Qin and Great Feng dynasties. In this time of war, the academy was like a pure land in the human world. There were no sounds of war, and the teachers still taught and the students listened. Right now, teacher Jishang in the room by the window was one of the most popular scholars in the academy in recent years. Every time he taught the study of rhythm, rhyme, and rhythm, the room would be packed with people, regardless of whether it was winter or summer. If there were no seats in the room, they could just stand outside the window. For example, Qi Shens was surrounded by many students who were either listening to the lecture or looking at the person. Qi Shens was the eldest grandson of the Qi family after all, and he was also a famous figure in Shangyin Academy. When he came outside the window, many students who were close to him had no choice but to quietly give up their seats. Qi Shens looked at this plump and beautiful woman who even many of the younger generation had to respectfully address as Master Fish. For some reason, he thought back to last year's midwinter evening, when that white-haired youngster whose name Qi Shens didn't know paid a private visit to the Academy's Buddha's Palm Lake, the two of them having an undercurrent of conflict. Qi Shens didn't have the chance to draw that exquisite sword from his waist, one of the 12 famed swords of Dongyue's sword pool. Afterwards, when he gradually guessed that person's identity, as well as that fellow's various deeds that spread through the academy, Qi Shens had a period of time where he felt disheartened. However, he soon pulled himself together. As Northern Mang's army of 1,000,000 pressed into the northwest, as well as the banner with the character Jiang raised high above Guangling Road, Qi Shens became more and more complacent. In the past, his grades in the academy had always been outstanding, second only to Su Weisheng, second only to Ko Jianghuai, second only to Ko Jianghuai in the study of the sword. Since Ko Jianghuai could make a name for himself, Qi Shens's family background and knowledge didn't lose to Ko Jianghuai's, so why would he have to worry about not being able to seize the opportunity to rise up in this chaotic world, becoming the person who revived his family? Inside the room, the woman who was narrating the musical principles of the past dynasties wore a stone-green robe wrapped in a light red brocade, and a jade belt tied around her waist. Although she was sitting cross-legged, one could still clearly see her graceful figure. From head to toe, her charm was like flowing spring water, breathtaking and never tiring of looking at her 100 times. Beside her was a small incense burner. It was unique, using goose pear to steam agarwood incense. It was both smokeless and refreshing. The room was filled with mist. As teacher Ji Shang, she was able to sit alone under the wall, as if she had fallen into the clouds and mist. She was absent-minded like a goddess. Hanging from the wall were a dozen or so scrolls that had yet to be opened. Beside her stood a little girl with pigtails. In Shangyin Academy, she was the leader of the children. Her nickname was Little Wooden Fish. Her parents were both teachers of the academy. They had once been illustrious nobles of northern Han. However, during the chaotic times of the spring and autumn period, their family of 3 lived in poverty. Little Wooden Fish's father could be considered half a disciple of Grand Chancellor Wang, who had betrayed the academy. For some unknown reason, he did not follow Grand Chancellor Wang to Beiliang. Instead, he gave up the glory, splendor, and wealth that was at his fingertips. He continued to be an embarrassed teacher in the academy, depressed and unable to achieve his goals. This was probably the so-called contentment of poverty and happiness. Qi Shens was different from those students who had ulterior motives. He was truly listening attentively to Master Yu's teachings and explanations. This summer, she had engraved a book, The Rime of the Golden Lotus, which had received praise from Grand Chancellor Qi, who had not yet left the mountain and entered the capital. He personally wrote a preface for the book, which was sold out on the same day. This book was divided into 2 volumes. In total, there were no more than 36 words, yet it was all-encompassing. Many of the sentences had already spread throughout the academy. For example, when explaining the character for East, there was a line, "A woman's slender eyebrows are like a crescent moon, a man's vigor is like a 10,000 zhang long rainbow." When explaining the character for Loyalty, there was a line, "Emperor Qin's great military uniform is bestowed with the 3-foot sword of peace." However, what made Qi Shens's grandfather sigh with emotion the most was when explaining the character for Jiang, 1,000 mountains against 10,000 rivers, one's homeland against another. Furthermore, Master Yu's original exegesis, primary school, had sorted out the changes in musical temperament since the Sanskrit of the western regions had entered the Central Plains. His grandfather originally had some objections to his grandson, whom he had high hopes for, being unable to let go of a downtrodden woman. Recently, he had loosened up a bit. He still did not agree, but he also did not object. Inside the room, Master Yu was explaining the military war songs of various dynasties and generations. The goat-horned girl was in charge of opening the scrolls. Each scroll had a vigorous or sorrowful lyric written on it. Only 2 armies in the current era had received this honor. One was the Beimang South Courtyard's Dong Army, led by King Dongjua. The other was the Beiliang Frontier Army's Beiliang Song. Qi Shens could clearly feel Master Yu's joy and depression when she was explaining the Beiliang Song. Qi Shens had been traveling among flowers for many years without being attached to a single leaf. How could he not understand the principle that it was easy to pick up when one's love was shallow, but difficult to let go when one's love was deep? However, Qi Shens did not think that the woman he loved was really hopelessly in love with the young man who had visited the school. Otherwise, why didn't she follow him back to Beiliang? Why did she stay alone in the Shangyin Academy? As the lesson was coming to an end, a fat white cat appeared out of nowhere. It was as popular as its owner in the Shangyin Academy. Although it was charmingly naive, it was actually very cunning. Many of Mr. Jishang's meals were taken away by it. Lu Zhen, who was teaching Wang Ba at the school, had a big white crane. He loved it so much that he even nicknamed it Crane Wife. However, in the past half a year, the white cat had scratched off many feathers. Lu Zhen had cried to Master Yu many times because of this. In the end, he had no choice but to give up the plum forest and move to the most remote place in the Shangyin Academy. Only then was he able to escape from the claws of the white cat, Wu Meinyang. The white cat pounced into Master Yu's embrace, causing all of the scholars to silently drool. Those who were brave didn't look sideways, their minds swaying, while those who were timid quietly shifted their gazes, afraid that they would blush. Everyone knew that Master Yu's mother was the sword attendant of the late Emperor of West Chu. Her sword dance was one of the 4 masters of the Dechu dynasty. It was as famous as Yu Baikui's art of war, Li Qin's chess skills, and Wang Qing's poetry. It was said that Master Yu had inherited her mother's sword dance. Moreover, the scholars were not blind. They all knew that Master Yu was not only knowledgeable, but also that her chest, which she had been deliberately hiding and suppressing, was even more impressive. If they could see her sword dance, it would be worth it even if they lost 10 years of their life. When the lesson ended, whether they were sitting in the room or standing outside the window, the scholars, including Qi Shens, all bowed respectfully. Master Yu bowed her head slightly in return and then had the scholars leave the room first. She put down the white cat, Wu Meinyang, who had been sleeping lazily in her arms, and helped the goat-horned girl put away the scrolls hanging on the wall. At this time, Qi Shens went against the flow and came into the room. He quietly watched her stand on tiptoe to pick up the scrolls. When she stretched her waist and raised her arms, he followed her line of sight. Her waist was extremely slender because of the jade belt, and some parts of her body were extremely full. Qi Shens was very tempted and smiled slightly. Scholars did not like flatness when looking at mountains, and it was even more so when admiring women. She, who had already used her real name, Yu Xuanji, did not pay attention to Qi Shens. She lowered her head to look at the little wooden fish who had volunteered to carry the large pile of scrolls. She rubbed the little girl's head and smiled gently. "Can you carry it?" This goat-horned girl, who was more competitive than boys among her peers, nodded vigorously. She glanced out of the corner of her eye at Qi Shens, the first young master of the Qi family, who she had always disliked. She pouted at Sister Yu, then rolled her eyes and ran out of the room. She, who had used the name Yu Wei in Beiliang, looked at Qi Shens with an indifferent expression and asked, "What is it?" Qi Shens smiled and said, "Just saying goodbye before leaving." Yu Wei made an "oh" sound and did not say anything else. Clearly, she meant that their relationship was normal. If he wanted to leave, she would not ask him to stay or send him off. Qi Shens hesitated and did not have the intention to turn and leave. Instead, he sat behind the short yellow rosewood table that could be seen everywhere in Shangyin Academy, like a student asking for guidance from his teacher. It was undeniable that this future patriarch of the Qi family was romantic and elegant. It was rumored that many attractive female teachers in the academy had fallen in love with him, not to mention those young women who were in the prime of their youth. Every time Qi Shens went out, there would be many women who used their connections to get close to him. Qi Shens sat upright and still. He raised his head to look at Master Yu, who was standing, and asked softly, "Master Yu, do you think I should go find my good friend Ko Jianghuai to ask for wine or go study at the capital Imperial College?" Yu Yue frowned and said, "You should ask that grandfather of yours who did not follow the great exodus to West Chu, not me." Qi Shens smiled playfully. "West Chu? Shouldn't it be to Chu?" "All right, I already know the answer. This one will go to Great Peace City now." Yu Yue smiled coldly but did not speak. Qi Shens slowly stood up and looked straight at this woman who rejected all men. He said in a gentle voice, "Xuanji, can you wait for me for 3 years? In 3 years, I will definitely be famous. Everyone in the court will know of me, Qi Shens, as well as Ko Jianghuai." Yu Yue actually smiled. This was a scene that Qi Shens had never seen before. Just when Qi Shens thought he had a chance, Yu Yue looked out the window and said calmly, "So what if you are Ko Jianghuai? Even if you are the great official Chao Chongqing, so what? Is he very powerful?" Yu Yue smiled strangely and asked again, "Is he really very powerful? Is he the #1 in the world?" Qi Shens immediately felt a chill run through his body as if he had fallen into an icy cavern. In terms of family background and fame, Qi Shens really could not match up to that person. The hereditary king of Beiliang, who had 300,000 cavalry in the world. The person who had reached the top of the martial evaluation and made Li Yang and Bei Mang bow to him. Chapter 1235. Qi Shens quickly recovered from his dejection and shook his head. His eyes were resolute as he said, "It's not the same. I will climb up step by step from an ordinary pawn." Yu Yue seemed to have heard the funniest joke in the world. She wanted nothing more than to burst into laughter. She waved her hand and said mockingly, "Don't say any more. I'll laugh myself to death. Qi Shens, I won't hold you back from making contributions on the battlefield." Qi Shens didn't get angry. He asked, "Before I leave, I want to know what's so funny. It's better to enjoy it together than to enjoy it alone." Yu Yue stretched out her hand. It was clear that she wanted him to leave. Qi Shens lived up to his reputation as the Qi family's pillar. He had a decisive personality and didn't make any loathsome one-sided love. He strode out of the room. Yu Yue waited until he was far away before crouching down and picking up Wu Meinyang. She looked at it with a smile in her eyes. "Someone once told a joke. He said that the tortoise and the rabbit ran away one after the other. In reality, the rabbit would never be able to catch up to the tortoise in its entire life. He called this a paradox and even used a wine cup and chopsticks to explain it for a long time. However, I still think it's twisted logic and a joke. Wu Meinyang, don't you think so?" She pressed her cheek against the white cat's head. Her eyes were sorrowful as she said softly, "Wu Meinyang, is it because no one bullies you that you feel lonely?" Yu Yue slowly closed her eyes. "A person lives here, but their heart dies there. Isn't that a paradox?" After putting down the painting scroll, the little wooden fish bounced back to the door. When it saw Yu Yue crouching on the ground with a face full of tears, it immediately flew into a rage. It quickly ran over to Yu Yue and crouched down. It said angrily, Big Sister Yu, did that lecher surnamed Qi bully you? I'll kick him to death right now." Yu Yue opened her eyes. She was a bit helpless. She smiled gently and said, "No. The goat horn girl was a bit doubtful. Really? Yu Yue nodded. The little girl waved her fist and said, Sister Yu, didn't you secretly tell me that guy was the master who defeated old Immortal Wang? Humph, you know, last time he said that my fist technique was invincible and my leg technique was unparalleled. Then, the little girl asked timidly, Sister Yu, why are you crying? Yu Yue blushed as a child caught her losing her composure. She prevaricated, it's just a sad scene. Only then did the sheep-horned girl let out a mischievous laugh. Hey, big sister fish, I'm going to study medicine right now. Yu Yue was confused and asked, why? The little girl chuckled and said, okay, I'll help sister you make a medicine for regret. Yu Yue was stunned. When she came back to her senses, she pinched the little wooden fish's rosy cheeks. When you grow up, you will know that there are some things that you should regret. The little girl made a face and said, then I don't want to grow up. If I regret it every day, my heart will ache. Yu Yue smiled and stood up. Holding the big white cat in one hand and the little wooden fish in the other, she walked out of the house. On the way back, they passed by the Buddha's palm lake. The little wooden fish couldn't help but click her tongue. The snowman that the white-haired brother made last time was really, really big. For some reason, the goat-horned girl inadvertently raised her head to look at Big Sister Fish. She lowered her head as if she was looking at her own chest. Then, her appearance was probably the delicate and alluring that the lechers often talked about. The little girl gasped. She understood. That guy who had once freeloaded at her house must have molested Sister Yu there. While the goat horn girl defended Sister Yu, she was also curious. It seemed that Sister Yu wasn't angry. Instead, she was happy. She still didn't understand the love and hatred between adults. The little girl, who was the head of the household at a young age, sighed and said to herself, sure enough, the name of the medicine for regret is forget each other in Jianghu, and the root of the illness is can't help each other in need. Chapter 1236. North of Beimang and Orange State, south of Shihe State, there was a famous Dunhuang city. The number one devil of Beimang, Luo Yang, used to be the lord of half of the city. With Luo Yang's betrayal of Beimang and the wrath of the empress, Luo Yang killed her way through the encirclement and entered Liyang territory. Since then, she had completely disappeared from Beimang. However, this was like adding oil to the fire for Dunhuang City. Especially when the military god, Tuoba, was ordered by Her Majesty to sweep through the rear and eliminate all the unruly grassland forces. Although Helian Weiwu, the head of Shihe State, had always turned a blind eye to Dunhuang City and did not have much ill feelings towards it, and Murong Baoding, the head of Orange State, had always been regarded as the backer of Dunhuang City. However, this great turmoil that swept through Beimang's north court still affected Dunhuang City more or less. Many unruly grassland lords were forced to leave their territories to avoid Tuoba, causing them to wreak havoc like a swarm of locusts. Fortunately, the new general, Su Pong, was in charge of the army in Dunhuang City. There were also Yuan Duan, Duanmu Chongyang, and the others who held real power in Dunhuang City. The people in the city felt that as long as Dunhuang City did not raise its flag and rebel, Dunhuang City would not be so weak even if some unruly grassland forces wanted to take over the city. However, what made the people in Dunhuang City feel the most uneasy was the beautiful city lord. After quelling the bloody rebellion in the city, she disappeared. She had disappeared for more than half a year. At that time, not only were the ordinary nobles in the city unable to see her, even the old officials of the Yuan family and the Duanmu family could not see her. It was not until this year's summer that she leisurely returned to Dunhuang City. During this period of time, there was a great deal of discussion. The entire city was filled with rumors and slanders, and all sorts of rumors flew about. Some said that this northern Mang's little empress had been lusted over by Murong Baoding's beauty, and had been kidnapped. There were also some that said that she had been summoned into the imperial tent by the empress, and that she had been acknowledged as her niece. In any case, there were all sorts of bizarre rumors. Fortunately, the city lord disappeared for more than half a year and took back power from Su Pong, who had become a general overnight. Inside the giant Immortal Palace, there was an inconspicuous Qingfeng courtyard. It was filled with plantains. For some reason, it had always been a forbidden area. What was even stranger was that this place could not be said to be heavily guarded. On the contrary, the Golden Guards of Dunhuang City had never stepped into this place to patrol. It was like a cold palace. At this moment, General Su Pong, who was rumored to be intolerable with the city lord, was sitting on a stone bench in the courtyard. Other than the mistress of Dunhuang sitting opposite him, there was not even a palace maid. Su Pong, or rather, Su Pu, who had held the power of the cavalry together with the king of Beiliang's brother-in-law, Wuxia, was giving her a detailed report of the latest battle situation on the border of Liangmang. The southern court of Beimang's 3 elite cavalry armies had separately invaded Liangmang and Luzhou. However, the thunder was big but the rain was small. Apart from the cavalry army that invaded Luzhou, the two armies faced each other for a moment and then retreated without a fight. There was no news of the troops and horses that had rushed to Liangmang and Luzhou. No matter how hard the spies in Dunhuang City tried to dig up secret information, they could not obtain the slightest bit of information. It should be known that the #1 spy in Dunhuang City had already contacted an important figure in the southern court who was second only to the imperial edict of peace, but he still returned without any results. Su Pu did not believe that this was some bullshit general who did not obey orders. Either this was a last-minute plot by Fatty Dong, or this was an established policy that the imperial edict of peace had long planned. Regardless of which it was, Su Pu felt a sense of suffocation as if a storm was coming. If he was a general of the Beiliang frontier army, he could remain calm and collected. However, he was now an outsider in Dunhuang City in the hinterland of Beimang, who could only watch the fire burning across the river. It was inevitable that his chest would be filled with depression. That woman was not only a first-rate maidservant of Beiliang Palace's Wutongin, but also a loyalist of His Royal Highness. She was also the lord of Dunhuang City and a top assassin in Beimang. When Sweet Potato heard the vanguard cavalry retreat without a fight, he said softly, "Uncle Su, the great general had painstakingly built Liangzhou and Yuzhou for 20 years when he was alive. With the old General Yan Wenluan guarding Yuzhou, Chu Lushan is personally overseeing the northern pass of Liangzhou. Dong Zhuo wants to attack Liuzhou first, and Beimang wants to use Liuzhou as a breakthrough point. Our Beiliang wants to use Liuzhou as bait. Both sides have their own goals. In the end, it seems like it depends on whether the terrain wins or the people win." Su Pu said calmly, "If Beimang is determined to fight to the death with Liuzhou, which has no city to defend, will definitely not be able to defend. The key is how much meat will be cut off from Liangmang in this slaughterhouse. In my opinion, even if Beimang loses 150,000 elites in Liuzhou, as long as Beiliang loses 50,000, as long as we cross this boundary, even if we lose just one more soldier, then Beiliang will have already lost this battle. Defending the northwest of Liangzhou and defending the north of Yuzhou is just to buy time for Liang. Beiliang, Beimang, and Liang are 3 pillars. Liang can afford to waste the most time and national strength, Beimang is close behind, and Beiliang is the most stretched." Sweet Potato said worriedly, "The 30,000 Longxiang army is all in Liuzhou." Su Pu said sadly, "This is actually His Highness declaring his position to the Beiliang people. If we defend the country and fight to the death at the border, when we lose, there will definitely be someone surnamed Su among the dead." Sweet Potato asked, "Is it worth it?" Su Pu did not answer. Sweet Potato asked and answered his own question, "There are many things that cannot be said whether it is worth it or not." Sweet Potato suddenly asked, "Uncle Su, how is that little eunuch Dong shows martial talent?" Su Pu smiled and said, "His talent is average, but his roots are pure." On the path of martial arts, it is not said that only those with extraordinary talent can achieve good results. Moreover, the secret manual that the city lord selected does not care about innate talent, it only cares about the accumulation of time. Sweet Potato bit his lips and said regretfully, "It is not that there are no shortcuts to martial arts that can achieve instant results, it is just that they are not suitable for this simple and honest youth. However, I will not be at ease with an intelligent martial arts prodigy." Su Pu nodded and also sighed, "It is difficult to be satisfied with people, and it is difficult to do things as you wish." Sweet Potato looked at the sky. Su Pu gently got up and prepared to leave the courtyard. Sweet Potato smiled and asked, "Uncle Su, I still have a few jars of green ant wine here, why don't you take it back and drink it?" Su Pu looked at the tightly shut door with a gratified expression, then laughed and said, "The knot in my heart has been untied, there is no need to drink." Sweet Potato watched Su Pu leave, then turned and walked into the house. He opened the door and quickly closed it. All the tables and chairs in the house were wrapped in cotton cloth, and there was also an exquisite cradle that seemed to be used for sleeping children. She tiptoed towards the cradle, the smile on her face was warmer than ever. She squatted in front of the cradle and called out softly, "My little sweet potato, grow up quickly, then go and give your father a big scare." Chapter 1237. Jianghu is bustling. Mount Hui suddenly sends out hundreds of invitations to the entire Jianghu world, inviting all the heroes in the world to go to the towering moonless tower on the snowy plateau. Almost no one doubts or sneers at this, because the newly emerged Mount Hui's fist may not be big, but it is definitely hard enough. Legend has it that she was once the guest of the new King Liang, and then they parted ways. She intercepted Wang Xianji on the Yangtze River, which is an undeniable feat. Her life was hanging by a thread, but it was a blessing in disguise. She is already a real celestial state. God knows if she will become a terrestrial immortal after the closed-door training. There were even busybodies who added fuel to the fire, saying that when Crown Prince Xiao Zhuan was casually touring the south, there was also a secret and wonderful story between him and this purple-robed woman. Mount Hui, which is already full of visitors, is now climbing the mountain. Some experienced Jianghu old foxes start to count which gangs and sects have arrived. For example, the little immortal Wu Shizhen of the Qingyang Palace of Mount Qingqing is staying at the Mount Hui abode. Also, the master of the Quicksnow Mountain Villa, Wei Qi Liangfu, brings his beloved daughter Yuqi Nuchuan, who is entering Jianghu for the first time. The leader of the new Dao Zhuangtai in the northern Liaoxi also swaggers up the mountain. Lin Hongyuan, the young palace master of the southern border Dragon Palace, appears as magnificent as before. There is also the new owner of the Spring Invitation Cottage in Shishu, who is also the winner of the Rouge Beauty Award, thank you. When she appears, she is regarded as a celestial by countless men. However, when they think of her inextricable relationship with the king of Shu, Chen Jibao, no one dares to make trouble. Mount Longhu has been neighbors with Mount Hui for hundreds of years. The new Taoist master Zhao Ningxian personally comes out of the Taoist master mansion to visit the snowy plateau. Usually, it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens to bump into one of these elusive big shots in Jianghu. Now that they had appeared one after another, it was a feast for the eyes of the onlookers who were not qualified to be honored guests of the moonless brothel. They only felt that the travel expenses they had spent on this trip to Mount Hui were not a problem. In addition to the new top 10 gangs like Mount Longhu, the Spring Invitation Cottage, and the Quicksnow Mountain Villa, there are many old Jianghu sects that can be regarded as leaders in the provinces and counties. There are also the Beggar sect and Chao gang, which are rich but like to pretend to be poor. After receiving the hero's invitation, they also send their most important leaders to Mount Hui. They are either leisurely climbing the mountain to enjoy the scenery or are on the way here. There are also a lot of Jianghu individual immortals, who are all proud of receiving a hero's invitation. For example, Fan Qingsong, who is known as the Central Plain Swordsman in Jianghu, is 90 years old and half of his body is in the ground, but he still has to grit his teeth and risk his life to rush to Mount Hui. As for those who had just entered the Jianghu for a few years but had already made a name for themselves, they were even more ambitious and in high spirits. They wore the best clothes, rode the best horses, and carried the best weapons. Those who were handsome were as elegant as a jade tree in the wind. Those who were born inferior in terms of appearance were at least able to attract attention. Compared to those who had been in the Jianghu for a long time, they knew the principle of relying on clothes when going out to meet outsiders. This made some of the older seniors sigh with emotion. They were indeed worthy of being called the younger generation pushing the older generation forward. Even if the older generation did not die, they would be half dead on the beach. Interestingly, there are very few women who have received the hero's invitation this time. Those who have made a name for themselves in Jianghu can be counted with one's fingers. However, even if Mount Hui does not invite them, it does not mean that they are willing to miss this rare Jianghu event. Those who have strong connections will go hand in hand with the big sections. For the time being, those who have not made a name for themselves in front of the sect leaders and sect leaders will not lose face. In any case, they will shout at some of their admirers who are willing to pay for them. Most of these women are not ordinary, either openly or secretly competing with each other for beauty. Unknowingly, they have added countless topics of conversation in Mount Hui. It is one thing to join in the fun and visit Mount Hui to see the immortals, but finding a place to sleep is a real problem. In the surrounding counties, towns and villages, as long as there is a place for people to live, it is crowded. Not to mention the inns, even the houses of the inns are opened with money. Nowadays, the neighbors around Mount Hui are busy arguing every day about who has more Jianghu experts. For a time, all kinds of people are mixed in here. It is not that there are no criminals or people who want to fish in troubled waters, but they are all expelled or even killed on the spot by the foreign official of Mount Hui who is in charge of patrolling outside the mountain. During this period, there are a few people who have crossed the river and disregarded the law. In the end, the great foreign official Huang Fangfu personally killed them. After that, from the county magistrate to the prefectural governor, there is no one to collect the corpse. This is the first time that Jianghu has seen the hidden power of Mount Hui. Thousands of people in the martial arts world racked their brains, wanting to reach even higher places in Mount Hui. Even if they were able to show their faces at the sword comprehension stele, it would be a great fortune. Perhaps being in Jianghu was a journey to climb high and look far. Some people stop at the foot of the mountain, some people struggle to reach the waist of the mountain, and then they can only look at the backs of the people. As the lucky people climb higher and higher, there are fewer people at the top. Until they are qualified to be secretly happy, but on the surface, they say that it is lonely at the top. Even though there were still 3 days before the start of the martial arts tournament, there were still plenty of tourists. The paths leading up to the mountain were already packed with people. Those who were impatient had already started cursing, and there were also a lot of children crying among them. At the foot of Mount Hui, many tea houses and wine stalls have been temporarily set up for tourists to rest. Not far away is the ferry port, and no less than 100 ships of various sizes go back and forth between Mount Hui and Mount Longhu. Inside the tea houses and wine stalls, there are many people talking loudly. Among them, there is a well-dressed guest who is commenting on the heroes of the world who have passed away with the river. Every time he calls out a name, he will drink a cup of wine. The people named by this person are Wudong's Wang Zhonglo and Hong Shixiang, the sword maniac Wang Xiaoping who will not back down even if he dies, the cat man Han Xingxian who is invincible below the land immortal, the dragon tree monk of the 2 Zen temples, the Dongyue sword pool Song Nianqing, the black-clothed sick tiger Yang Taisui, the Shishu blacksmith Jian Jiuhuang, the spring invitation cottage Xiaolingzhen, the pair of grandfather and grandson Xianyuan Dandan and Xianyuan Jingqing. The pair of Taoist masters from Mount Longhu, of course, the old god of sword Li Chungang, and the most important Wang Xianji. In the end, Liu Baijia also has a lot of regrets. Sword Fairy Tang Shi, who is expected to become the land immortal of sword, had to give away her sword after becoming the Minister of War. At the next table, a young child with delicate features is snuggling in the warm embrace of his graceful mother. His father is full of smiles, drinking slowly. There is an ancient long sword overflowing with sword chi on the table. Judging from his demeanor, he is definitely not a common person of the Jianghu. The child's voice is clear and sweet. He looks at the man who is full of the smell of alcohol and talks about heroes and asked curiously, "May I ask, uncle, after the death of Wang Xianji in Martial Emperor City, is that king of Beiliang really the most powerful person in the world?" My elder said that after he fought with Wang Xianji, his realm is destined to drop greatly. Now, can he still defeat the Beimang military god Tuoba? The child's words carry no harm and are not annoying. Chapter 1238. The man who had just finished a cup of wine wiped his mouth and laughed. Just as he was about to pour more wine to drink, he lifted the jug and found that there was not a single drop left. Just as the man was about to ask the shopkeeper for new wine, the child's father stretched out a finger and gently patted the neck of the unopened wine jug on his table. The wine jug leisurely spun around and landed right in front of the man. This method of delivering wine was not mysterious, but this unknown swordsman's ingenuity lay in his control of strength. After the wine jug touched the table, it was as if it had taken root and did not move at all. This level of proficiency was definitely at the second level of the master realm. The man did not hold back. After nodding his head, he poured himself a bowl of wine and drank it all. He said, "Young hero, I, Wang Bopo, am not someone who speaks without thinking. I will only say what I know. Let's not talk about whether the king of Beiliang's realm fell or rose. I only know that after the battle between him and Wang Xianji, the current head of the Wu family's sword tomb came out of the mountain and went to the border of Yuzhou with his sword. He used his 14th sword, but he still could not stop the young king of Beiliang. Now, another senior swordsman who has never appeared in Jianghu has gone to Liangzhou. I guess there will be another great battle." The child waved his hand. "I am not a young hero, at least not now. My father said that I must wait until I am 20 years old before I can roam Jianghu alone. My mother has given me more than 10 famous nicknames. Unfortunately, they are like the money I get every year. I can only save them. Sigh, why is it so hard to grow up?" All the men and women in the tavern burst into laughter. They were amused by the child's naivety. The woman knocked on her son's head. The swordsman's eyes were gentle and filled with love and pride. This was the feeling that every father would have when looking at their child. The child continued, "I really admire the king of Beiliang. One day, I will become his disciple and learn from him." The man couldn't help but tease, "Then you'll have to see if that old man will accept you as his disciple." The child was stunned for a moment. He patted his chest and said, "Dad said that I have extraordinary talent. I'm a martial arts prodigy that's hard to come by in 100 years. Even if I was born 60 years earlier, I could still spar with Daoist Master Qi of Mount Longhu next door. If the king of Beiliang doesn't accept me as his disciple, then it's really, really." "Mother, what's that phrase again?" the woman said softly, "Casting pearls before swine." The hall was filled with laughter again. The child's father had a helpless look on his face. Inside the tavern, the man and the child were fighting and fooling around. It was a happy and harmonious atmosphere. Suddenly, there was a commotion outside the tavern. Soon, someone ran in and shouted, "Little ancestor Qi Xianxia, who left the Taoist master's residence to travel Jianghu for many years, also got off the ferry and climbed up the mountain." Not only this tavern, but most of the people from the nearby tea stalls also ran out. When the child heard the name Qi Xianxia, he just curled his lips. He probably didn't want to move because he didn't think highly of him. He lay on the table and watched his father drink. When there was no one else in the tavern, he whispered in a tone that people from the Central Plains couldn't understand, "Dad, does the king of Bailiang disdain to participate in this kind of martial arts competition?" If Su Fingnian, who had gone through Bei Mang, was here, he would definitely be able to tell that this was an authentic Norland dialect. The middle-aged swordsman smiled and said, "He's busy dealing with our million-strong army and has no time to pay attention to this. Otherwise, I think he would come. That person, I think he's looking forward to Jianghu." The child stretched out a hand and sighed, "So many top masters have left Liang, but we're much luckier." Among the 5 major sects, only the 5th raccoon of Bubang Mountain died. The big and small thoughts of Princess Tomb are still there. The chess and sword music school, Hong Jingyan, Sword Chi Jin, and the bronze men are all still there. None of them died. Speaking of this, the child smiled and said, "Dad, you're different from them. You're a sect all by yourself, and you're ranked higher than the chess and sword music school. If Mom wasn't from Liang, you could challenge the king of Bailiang and lose to him. As for me, I can take this opportunity to get to know him." The man looked at his wife and said in a pure Liaodong dialect, "My dear wife, look at this. Our daughter hasn't grown up yet, but she's already helping an outsider. What will happen in the future?" The man's originally warm smile suddenly bloomed with a monstrous aura. The ancient sword that was originally full of sword chi suddenly restrained its sharpness. The woman laughed softly and asked, "Who's here? Who's worthy of your treatment? It can't be your archenemy Tuoba or that new white-clothed devil, right?" The man looked at her and his majestic aura slowly relaxed. He said with a bit of bitterness, "Unfortunately, they're all here." The woman said lightly, "You said long ago that you're leaving Bei Mang. We can't just tie you up and bring you back, can we?" The man with an inconspicuous appearance pinched his chin and said, "Back then, Her Majesty was." The woman glared and pinched him. "What do you mean back then? Didn't she just want to acknowledge you as her son-in-law? What, are you regretting marrying an old hag like me who'll drag you down? Then you should go back." The man smiled but didn't say anything. At this time, anything he said would be wrong. The more he said, the more mistakes he would make. It was better to keep silent and meditate. The infatuated men in the world, regardless of their status, mostly believed that liking a woman was wrong and hoped that they would never change their mistakes. The child asked, "Dad, you're not a swordsman. Why do you always like to carry a sword? You always didn't tell me the reason before. Can you tell me? If Mom blames you, I'll teach her a lesson for you. In any case, you're the 3rd son and I'm the eldest. There's always something to subdue someone else." The man carefully glanced at his wife. Seeing that she didn't move, he laughed softly and said, "Your mother, when she was young, she only admired that green-clothed sword-wielding knight-errant. Dad has a lot of skills, but your mother doesn't like them. Later, I can only carry a sword to pretend. Wife, how many years have I carried a sword?" The woman reached out and held her husband's big hand. She said gently, "How many years have you carried a sword depends on how old the child is." The man couldn't help but sigh. "That's right." Outside the wine shop, a short middle-aged man with long arms like an ape glanced at the wine shop. He hesitated for a moment and continued to climb the mountain. He was inconspicuous in the crowd. He, whose surname was Tuoba, chose Mount Hui for the first time in his life to enter the Liang dynasty because Wang Xianji didn't wait for him and Su Fingnian was already waiting for him at the border of Liangmang. Then, the snow plateau where heroes gathered became his first choice. After this person climbed the mountain, 3 new guests came to the wine shop. One was in white, one was in red, and there was a burly man with a bag on his back. They sat across the table from the family of 3. The man who didn't practice the sword but carried a sword with an even more shocking sword aura smiled. He didn't look at the handsome man in white. Instead, he looked at the man with the bag on his back and asked, "Deng Mao, the loser of the loser. Why? Do you want to bully me because you have helpers? Deng Mao said with a cold face, don't you also have 3 people? The man was stunned by this very cold joke. You're as shameless as you used to be. Then he ignored Deng Mao, who had a broken spear in his bag, and turned to look at the woman in white and the woman in red. Luo Yang, you destroyed that divine weapon in the icy plains of the extreme north and ruined the battle between Tuoba and Wang Xianji. Why didn't he cause you any trouble when he brushed past you? The master of Zhulu Mountain in white looked indifferent. She poured herself a cup of wine and didn't say anything. The child suddenly broke the silence and said with a smile, you're Luo Yang, right? Among the men in the world, I only admire the king of Bailiang, my future master. Among the women, I only admire you. Why aren't you 2 together? I can call you master and mistress together in the future. Luo Yang laughed and raised her head to drink the wine in the cup. Chapter 1239. Like a bolt of purple lightning, a streak of purple suddenly fell from the top of the plateau onto the ferry. Countless mountaineers were shocked. Xianyuan Qingfeng, who had come out of seclusion, stood on the ferry and looked at a yellow dragon warship under the command of the Qingzhou Navy. An armored officer stood at the bow of the towering ship. Swords and halberds were everywhere on the ship, giving off a different aura than the local Qingzhou soldiers. As the ship approached, the people of Jianghu who had better eyesight all saw a flag with an unexpected word written on it, Siu. After recognizing the flag that was fluttering in the northwest of the dynasty, the relatively unfamiliar sabers on the waists of the armored soldiers were on the verge of being called Cold Saber. Xianyuan Qingfeng narrowed her long and narrow eyes. Her mood was far more complicated than her tranquil expression. She didn't care at all about the Bailiang officer standing at the bow of the ship, Hong Yu, who had once been the second guest of Mount Hui after Huang Fangfua. Although he was a martial artist of Jianghu, he was proficient in the art of war, especially cavalry warfare. Later on, he followed that person to Bailiang and didn't hesitate to bear the infamy of being a slave of 2 surnames, hoping to make a name for himself on the battlefield. However, after joining the Bailiang army, he never made a name for himself. Xianyuan Qingfeng originally thought that Hong Yu would be depressed, but unexpectedly, a secret letter arrived on the plateau. The letter said that before the martial arts convention began, Yozhou's new valiant cavalry commandant Hong Yu would lead 100 elites to escort over 90 large chests as a gift to Moonless Pavilion to congratulate Xianyuan Qingfeng on her glorious ascension to the position of martial arts alliance chief. The letter even used the teasing words unifying Jianghu. Xianyuan Qingfeng sneered and muttered to herself, you're clearly about to die, but I don't see you speaking so nicely. Inside the large chests on the ship were the treasured secret manuals of Mount Qingliang's Tide Listening Pavilion's armory. Moreover, they were all first-rate rare books. Xianyuan Qingfeng looked at the rolling river before her. The great river flows east and never returns. Do you want to scatter your wealth and never return? Back then, when I was facing a great calamity, I had to leave you for the sake of Mount Hui's business and my father's dying wish. At that time, you were just an ant in the eyes of the top 10 on the martial arts ranking, but you still didn't hide or retreat. Now that you've become the world's #1 and have 300,000 cavalrymen under Bailiang, you're just facing a Beimang, and you're starting to make arrangements for your death. Xianyuan Qingfeng, who was in seclusion cultivating the heavenly Tao, suddenly felt a wave of anger. Deep down, she had actually always regarded him as her goal. The 2 of them were different from almost all the other martial arts experts in Mount Liyang and Beimang. They hadn't been practicing martial arts for long, and their talents couldn't be said to be rare. They had only managed to reach the peak of Jianghu step by relying on opportunities earned by risking their lives over and over again. Xianyuan Qingfeng, after almost all the experts on the snow plateau died, in order to turn the tide, she abandoned herself and fell into the demonic path, almost destroying her own life. Then, she made a deal with him in Bailiang and absorbed the fate of the imperial jade seal to stabilize her realm. After the battle with Wang Xianji, she used Wang Xianji's God-connecting power to sever her emotions and all the karma of the mortal world. She narrowly passed the personal barrier and returned to her original state, a level higher than that of the Taoist embryo and sword embryo of the Buddha. In the end, because of her out-of-body state, Zhao Huangchao, who had a great connection with the Zhao clan of Liyang, escaped from an incomplete black rainbow and fled to the snow plateau before his death. He instilled all the knowledge he had learned in his life into her, allowing her to reach a higher level. She was confident that she could fight Tuoba and Dong Tai with all her strength, although her odds of winning were slightly lower. However, she wasn't even 30 years old yet, and her realm was advancing at a tremendous pace. What martial god of Beimang? What peach blossom sword god? Sooner or later, she would trample them under her feet and turn them into stepping stones for the terrestrial deva, Xianyuan Qingfeng. She firmly believed that the new century of Jianghu was nothing more than a matter between her and him. In the end, he emptied his arsenal in one fell swoop and left her with only his back facing the north. I blocked the river because I wanted to be even with you. You gave me the book because you wanted to be even with me. For some reason, only on this side of Mount Hui, the heavy rain suddenly fell and the mountain was covered in mud. For some reason, Xianyuan Qingfeng didn't reveal any of her qi to resist the sudden rainstorm. However, the moment the raindrops touched her body, her figure flashed and disappeared. In the next moment, she was already walking on a mountain path, allowing the rain to splash on her body. Her purple robe was soaked and wet. The yellow dragon ship was about to dock. Hongyu raised his head and looked at the huge rock on Bull Hill. The corners of his mouth curled up. Did this count as him returning home in glory? In the Liyang dynasty, there were many surplus generals and commandants, not to mention military commandants. However, who would dare to look down on a military commandant of Beiliang, one of the 16 veteran commandants, the valiant cavalry commandant? This title had been held by the senior cavalry general Su Pu, the current cavalry commander Yuan Zuozong, and even the king of Shu, Chen Jibao, for a period of time. Hongyu was an honest and strong man. Just by looking at his appearance, he looked like a middle-aged villager who spent most of his time in the yellow earth and back facing the sky. In Mount Huishan, it was as if he had always been a head above Hongyu. Moreover, he himself had never treated the Great Snow Plateau as a place to retire. Hongyu had his eyes on one person in northern Liang, the Yuzhou general Huang Fuqing. This person came from Jianghu and relied on selling to gain his position as a border official. He had practically paved a broad path for Hongyu to follow. In Mount Hui, other than Xianyuan Qingfeng, he did not dare to look down on Mount Hui. Huang Fangfua, a guard dog, was no longer in his eyes. It was hard for Hongyu not to feel happy. However, even so, Hongyu still had to carefully observe the expression of a young woman beside him. The leader of the Fish Dragon Gang, Lu Narong, was not worth mentioning in terms of martial arts or family background. However, Hongyu had heard that she was inextricably linked to the king of Beiliang. To be honest, along the way, Hongyu could not understand why the picky Su Fingnian would choose such an ordinary-looking Jianghu woman. After Chen Jibao entered Shu, he had at least supported a beauty named Xia. If he placed such a pretty girl beside him, she would at least be pleasing to the eye. Then what was the king of Beiliang after? Hongyu was puzzled. Could it be that the Jianghu people in Beiliang were just teasing Jianghu people? As a bystander, Hongyu did not understand. As a participant, Lu Narong did not understand either. The status that she and the Fish Dragon Gang had today was like an autumn dream, untimely and untimely. Lu Narong raised her head and looked at Mount Hui. On the mountain peak, she could only see the eaves of the tall buildings on the mountain. The woman in purple from before was like a bolt of purple lightning descending to the world. What a grand style! Lu Narong admired such a woman from the bottom of her heart. She felt that if Xianyuan Qingfeng, who had relied on himself to ascend the throne of the Wulin Alliance, could travel Jianghu with that person, it would be a good match. For no reason, Lu Nerong thought of the trip out of the fortress. She did not know why, but she had forgotten the ups and downs of the battles all these years. However, she clearly remembered the well water in the small fortress and the comical scene of that person squatting at the mouth of the well and haggling with the water peddler. Lu Nerong withdrew her gaze and looked at the turbid river flowing east. Occasionally, a few fish would jump out of the river and fall back into the river. She did not know whether they were returning home or leaving. When the junk ship reached the shore, the ship slowly bumped into the dock. Lu Nerong, who was slightly swaying, muttered to herself, "If you left the court and did not become the king of Bailiang, how comfortable would it be to be just a Jianghu person?" Chapter 1240. That year, the smoke of war was everywhere, but it did not burn such an inconspicuous town. It was not a place that the military would fight for. Although it was Jiangnan, there was not much fertile land. According to a few businessmen who had traveled extensively, there was a disaster north of the Guangling River. But to the people of the small town who lived in a corner, it was good to be a frog at the bottom of the well. The sky was always only as big as the mouth of the well. Peace was a blessing, and contentment was happiness. Today, the small town was in a continuous autumn rain. Looking from the entrance of a restaurant, there were pedestrians with hurried footsteps holding umbrellas as they walked across the blue stone bridge. Business was slow, and there was no need to serve customers. The waiter of the restaurant sat idly at the entrance, waiting for the woman he admired to come closer. She said that she would follow her friend to the rouge shop next to the restaurant to choose because her friend was about to get married. She was going to marry into a good family, and was a scholar with scholarly honors. The waiter sighed, feeling a little bitter in his heart. The speaker did not mean it, but the listener meant it. She did not care about glory and wealth, or else she would not have taken a fancy to a cripple like him. But for better or for worse, he was a man who still had some sense of responsibility. He always wanted to let the woman he liked live a good life. Although she was not from a noble family in town, she was a well-known good person. Her family was well off, and she did not have to worry about food and clothing. She had a good temperament, and her needlework was 1 in 100. Everyone said that whoever married her was a blessing accumulated from several lifetimes, but she had taken a fancy to him. Because of this, her playmates who grew up with her were so angry that they almost broke off their friendship with her. While they fought for justice for her, they could not do without some strange words. For example, she had met a bad man, and was blinded by lard. These were all said directly in front of him and her. At that time, she looked at him, her slender little hands shyly twisting the corner of her clothes, her eyes full of apology. Fortunately, he was thick-skinned, and could still hold back his laughter. But how could his heart not be filled with guilt? Someone patted him on the shoulder, and he turned his head to look. The guy who could be considered familiar with him sat down beside him and asked with a silly smile, "Brother Wen, what are you thinking about?" He could be considered to be in the same boat as this kid, but this kid's situation was even worse. He had just moved to the town with his mother last year, and he couldn't even read 10 words from a book when it was spread open. Even if he fought, he wouldn't be of much use. Every day, he would be toyed with by those street ruffians who bullied strangers. It was so miserable that even after buying a new pair of boots with great difficulty, they would be stepped on until they became tattered. He couldn't be a scholar or a fighter. Fortunately, his mother still had some savings and had bought a cloth shop. His days were still bearable, and as long as he endured, he could still survive. He lived close to this guy and was probably the only local who did not add fuel to the fire. Over time, the two of them became so-called friends. He only knew that this kid's surname was Wang and that his father had yet to return from a long trip. He smiled and looked at the raindrops strung together along the eaves. He asked, "Bamboo, have you heard of a saying? Although the rain is wide, it does not moisten the rootless grass." That person was stunned, shook his head and laughed. "Brother Wen, I didn't know that you were a scholar." What do you mean, is there a story? The shop assistant surnamed one laughed and said, I heard it from someone else, so I didn't understand. At that time, I was too embarrassed to ask him, so I pretended that I understood. If I knew, I would have asked him. The young man nicknamed Bamboo was puzzled. Brother Wen, you have a scholar buddy. The shop assistant rubbed his chin and said with a smile, he's not some bullshit scholar, he just can't beat me, so he blindly showed off these things. The young man was happy. Then this person is really not good, he can't even beat Brother Wen, and he's not a scholar, isn't he the same as me? The shop assistant rolled his eyes at him, but did not say anything. Bamboo was a young man who could not control his mouth. He was afraid of the people of Jianghu, afraid of the banditry and Jianghu aura of those people, but he also looked forward to Jianghu. He liked to hang out in taverns and tea houses all day long, listening to those who called themselves Jianghu people brag. Now, he was talking to the shop assistant surnamed Wen about the grand martial arts event that happened once in 100 years. He said that he just found out that there was a woman in Mount Hui who liked to wear purple clothes. Not only was she as beautiful as a fairy, but also had superb martial arts skills. Bamboo was spitting saliva everywhere. He did not notice that Brother Wen beside him was either rolling his eyes or smiling absent-mindedly. Bamboo's mouth was dry. He was not a particular person. He bent down and reached out to cup a handful of rainwater, drank a mouthful, and pretended to be heroic. Good wine. The shop assistant smiled and joked, you even drank the taste of Jianghu. Bamboo turned his head and stared at the man. He asked seriously, Brother Wen, how did you kidnap Miss Liu? Why don't you teach me so that I can find a wife later? The shop assistant looked profound. He said, relying on appearance. Bamboo spat. Seeing that Bamboo didn't believe him, he laughed and said, you really don't believe me. Back then, when I was wandering around with that brother of mine, we were so poor, and he relied on his face to make a living. I am better than him in everything, but this face, I lost to him. Back then, we competed for who was the big brother and who was the little brother, from age to skill. If it weren't for the fact that I lost in terms of looks, I would have been able to become the big brother. Bamboo's mouth twitched. In the end, he was kind and did not dig at Brother Wen and his brother. Then, the two of them were silent for a while. They just listened to the rainwater dripping on the stone pavement. Bamboo suddenly whispered, Brother Wen, I want to tell you something, you can't tell anyone. The shop assistant said, it's up to you to say it or not. Bamboo hesitated. When I moved to town at the beginning of the year, I heard from a Jianghu master that among the masters in the world, one of them has the same name as my father. The shop assistant was amused. Bamboo, you're good. Your father is the old monster Wang Xinji of Martial Emperor City. Bamboo was angry. He shouted, nonsense, it's the 11th in the world. The shop assistant suddenly fell silent. After a long time, he said softly, so it's Wang Mingyin. Zhuzi's expression was gloomy as she muttered to herself, but I know that my father is actually a farmer with only a few kilograms of strength. It's not a big deal. It's even better if he's not the 11th in the world who died outside Xiangfan City. Mother and I can wait for him to come home one day. The shop assistant sighed. He did not know how to comfort him. He just patted his shoulder. Bamboo suddenly stood up, pointed at the small bridge, and laughed. Brother Wen, I won't delay you, I'll go first. The shop assistant surnamed Wen followed Bamboo's finger and saw a woman holding an umbrella across the bridge, slowly walking over. He stood up with a bright smile. The first time he saw her was when they met by chance at the town's market when he returned home. At that time, her friends laughed at him for being a cripple. They did not speak well and treated him as a lecher. She was the only one who was different. In the past, Xiaoyan said that he fell in love with every woman he saw and fell in love with anyone at first sight. He originally thought that when he met the woman before she returned home, she would be the last woman he fell in love with at first sight, and in fact, it was indeed so. After that, he no longer fell in love with anyone at first sight, but after meeting her in the small town, he felt that if he could spend the rest of his life with her, it would be better than anything else. He jogged out. She had just walked off the bridge. There were advantages of being small in the small town. There was no rigid etiquette of men and women touching each other, and she was not afraid of this. She tilted the oil paper umbrella. Her face was slightly red, and shielded him from the rain. He was never glib-tongued when he was with her, and in fact, after returning home, he was no longer as outspoken as before. He was honest and ordinary, and this was probably what she liked about him. In the past, as soon as he saw a woman, he would dare to flirt with her and say, "Miss, this big brother will help you cook the rice." If the woman ignored him, he would say, "Miss, you must have cultivated 3 lifetimes of fortune to be able to meet me. If you don't marry me, you must have suffered 8 lifetimes of bad luck." If the woman flew into a rage out of humiliation, he still had countless backup plans. But he was different now. At that time, when he saw a beautiful woman, his mind was filled with thoughts of getting out of bed. Now, standing beside her, he did not even have the courage to hold her hand. In the pugilistic world, there was him. Outside the pugilistic world, there was her. God did not owe him, Wenhua, anything. She lowered her head and mustered up her courage to say, "My father helped me arrange a marriage, but I didn't agree." He scratched his head and did not say anything. She pursed her lips. He suddenly smiled and said, "Why don't we have a son in the future?" She opened her mouth slightly, her face full of astonishment. He let out a long breath. It did not seem like he was joking, and said, "Back then, I was engaged to a child. Whoever had a daughter would be at a disadvantage. Of course, if we had a daughter, that would also be very good." She turned her head, her face red, but seemed to nod. He inadvertently lowered his head and saw that her hand that was not holding the umbrella was twisting the corner of her clothes out of habit. He gritted his teeth and finally mustered up the courage to hold her hand again. She gently pulled her hand away, and then let him hold it. Wenhua grinned. He did not hold the sword. Holding her hand, this kind of pugilistic world was better than anything. Chapter 1241. Outside the elixir garden, a carriage arrived late and slowly parted the crowd. Then the audience saw a slender figure lift the curtain and get off the carriage. He walked up the steps and onto the elixir garden. In his hand was an ancient sword with a simple scabbard. In the past 100 years, the way of the sword had never been popular. There had never been a young swordsman who could learn invincible swordsmanship just by finding a secret manual. This was all thanks to Li Chuangong's sword style. Dong Tai's swordsmanship was beyond that of the ancients. Of course, there was also the Donghua sword pool's swordsmanship. Every new sword produced by the sword pool was a treasure that all Jianghu swordsmen dreamed of. However, in the field of swordsmanship, Western Shu had always been an anomaly. There was a saying that, the older the sword, the more precious it is. Among the top 3 swords of Shu, except for the Earth-Skin Z that had accompanied the sword emperor of Western Shu out of Jianghu, that the Way of Shu, and the Thunderbox had never fallen out of the top 10 swords in the world. No one knew who was the first to recognize the name of the ancient sword. For a while, everyone was talking about the Way of Shu. Everyone knew that after the fall of Western Shu, the sword had been sealed in the Tide Listening Pavilion for many years. Finally, it had seen the light of day again. There were also some tactful spectators who were about to kneel down and kowtow to the young man when they saw him. However, when they were halfway through their words, they realized that everyone around them was rolling their eyes at them. They could only give up and swallow their flattery. Northern Liang had the blood of martial arts flowing in their veins. In the eyes of most of the common people and Jianghu people, since this new Prince Liang had come with a light carriage, he didn't want to put on airs of killing the eldest son. Instead, he wanted to have a fair competition of martial arts. This was not the Central Plains, where the fist was the only thing that mattered here. Otherwise, why would it be said that the civil officials of Beiliang could defeat the generals of Liang Imperial Court with one hand? The reason why the Bailiang people were able to tolerate the numerous general class families and the 20 years of oppression was also because of their natural disposition. It was true that those general class children had committed crimes, but who asked their fathers to be generals who had rolled out from a pile of corpses? It was also a skill for others to be reincarnated into a good family. If they were not reincarnated into a good family, there was nothing to complain about. The most important thing was to let their children be reincarnated into a good family in the future. Probably because he had waited for too long, Sui Xiegu yawned and his snow-white eyebrows fluttered in the wind. Apparently, Su Fengnian wanted the Ancestor Eater sword to wait a little longer. After entering the pill seed field, he didn't show any signs of fighting immediately. Instead, he leaned his sword on the ground and placed his palm on the hilt. This kind of appearance, in the eyes of the spectators outside the field, could really be counted as the so-called Yuji Yuan Qi expert's demeanor. The Bailiang people's internal strife was fierce, but their degree of xenophobia was no less inferior. Compared to the unfamiliar old man who didn't carry any weapons, they naturally felt closer to this prodigal who had turned over a new leaf and was once known as His Royal Highness. Therefore, when Su Fengnian appeared on the stage, there was a burst of cheers and applause. Sui Xiegu, whose chi flowed like a magnificent waterfall, looked around and finally stared at Su Fengnian. A battle between experts was a battle of strength, battle of chi, battle of wits and battle of courage. Ultimately, it was still a battle of the heart. Sui Xiegu wanted to ask this young number one person in the world who was the strongest. Naturally, he wanted to fight to his heart's content. This was also what the old man was puzzled about. If the Tide Listening Pavilion restricted the movements of both parties, wouldn't the pill seed field be even more restricted? However, since the kid had called for a battle here, Sui Xiegu couldn't be bothered to reject. After all, if the innocent were to be implicated, it would be the people under this guy's rule. Sui Xiegu had been in the Jianghu for almost 100 years and had always been alone. There was nothing to be concerned about. Sui Xiegu was not a magnanimous person. If he made it clear that Su Fengnian didn't know the severity of the situation and insisted on putting on a show, Sui Xiegu would definitely kill him. As for whether the enigmatic Su Yanbing would chase after him for thousands of miles, or whether the Bailiang's 300,000-strong cavalry would chase after him, why would Sui Xiegu care? If he really wanted to argue, the sword-eating elder was more worried that the old lady from the Guanyin sect would hold a grudge against him. However, that was all. Su Fengnian looked at Sui Xiegu in a daze. Thinking back to the time when he was following the old man in the sheepskin fur coat, when he first heard that an expert could travel hundreds of miles in an instant, it was like hearing a heavenly book. When he reached the top step by step, especially when he was a celestial being, he was able to look down on the mysterious celestial phenomenon of the first grade level 4. He also had a unique understanding of the mysteries of martial arts. The sword-eating elder in front of him was not the same as the average martial artist. He was a little similar to the young martial granduncle who rode the bull. He walked the path of the heavenly way and his route was the creation of all living things. Although the path was the same, there was a difference in the width of the path. Hong Shixiang's path was obviously wider. However, Sui Xiegu used the sword to seek the Tao. Ever since Sui Xiegu picked up the sword, he had spent a total of 80 years cultivating it meticulously. Whether it was the flow of blood and qi, the circulation of qi in the organs and lungs, or the opening and closing of the cardinal acupuncture points, all of them were at the peak of perfection. Rather than saying that the old man used the sword to seek the Tao, it was more accurate to say that Sui Xiegu had already used the Tao to develop the sword. This was probably the reason why Sui Xiegu dared to challenge Wang Xinji. The old man's physique and martial arts were not as high as Wang Xinji's. However, as long as Wang Xinji did not dare to claim that he was superior to the heavenly way, then both of them would have a chance. At this moment, there was a white rainbow that came from tens of thousands of miles away and crashed into the pill garden. Everyone subconsciously closed their eyes to avoid the dazzling light. When they slowly opened their eyes, they did not know why there was still nothing strange in the pill garden. The old man with snow-white eyebrows was still there, and the new Prince Liang, Su Fengnian, was also calm. Other than that, there was nothing else on the pill garden. However, Sui Xiagu seemed to be angry and grunted. Su Fengnian, whose palm was placed horizontally on the sword hilt, suddenly smiled, as if a knot in his heart had been untied. Chapter 1242. Back then, he had once met the Grand Tutor of Beimang, Li Qingshan, for the second time on the muddy road. He did not know whether it was before or after, but it was also good karma. The Qilin Daoist had said he was about to ascend, and he had indeed ascended. However, before Li Qingshan ascended, he had visited Beiliang as a streak of light and personally brought a message to Su Fengnian. It was a pity that apart from Sui Xiagu, who possessed a profound cultivation, no one else could appreciate such a shocking scene. The several thousand people outside the pill garden fields only took a blink of an eye, but to Su Fengnian and Li Qingshan, it felt like the time it took for a stick of incense to burn. After Li Qingshan ran into the pill garden fields, he staggered, almost colliding with Su Fengnian. After being supported by Su Fengnian with a smile, the old Daoist smiled brightly, but there was a hint of self-mockery in his voice. Since it's my first time ascending, and I've ascended to the high grade of the 18th grade, I thought I'd only ascend to the mid-grade at most. Even I found it rather difficult to control myself. It's mostly because of you. If I hadn't come, I wouldn't have been able to justify it. Su Fengnian bowed slightly. Congratulations on forging an immortal, Daoist. Li Qingshan extended a finger and pointed at the top of his head. Let's cut to the chase. My superiors are watching. I'm treated as a living immortal in the human world, but I'm just a rash newcomer there. I'll have to act according to their mood. I've taken the liberty of coming here this time to say some last words to you. You can treat them as the last words of an immortal. After all, whether or not there will be any ascended immortals in the future is another matter altogether. Let's not talk about that. Su Fengnian, I'll ask you something. You just have to ask yourself. I have to leave after asking. I don't want to hear your answer. Su Fengnian answered politely, please ask, Daoist. I'll think about it carefully. Li Qingshan straightened his face and asked sternly, cultivators, attaining immortality and ascending to the ranks of immortals. Are you challenging the heavenly Tao? Practitioners of martial arts cultivate their bodies and maintain their health, prolonging their lives. Are you competing with the King of Hell? Since both of them go against the common sense of heaven and earth, why are there still ascended celestials and level 1 experts? Su Fengnian couldn't help but laugh. Are you here as a lobbyist for this world? Li Qingshan shook his head. Think about it again. Just when Su Fengnian wanted to say something, Li Qingshan pointed at Su Fengnian's chest before vanishing in a flash. Afterwards, a pillar of light invisible to the world rose up from the ground, rushing into the clouds and breaking through the sky. Su Fengnian raised his head to look at the gradually dissipating light beam and the sea of clouds that remained in the sky. He suddenly remembered a kind of cultivation method on Mount Wudang that had been passed down for thousands of years and had been made public to the public. After ascending the mountain to cultivate, one would ask the heaven and earth. When one descended the mountain to cultivate, one would ask others. When one finally attained enlightenment, one would ask oneself. Cultivation. Cultivation was the truth. Su Fengnian began to realize that he seemed to have become far too busy after accompanying Su Xiao to meet the Empress of Beimang in the snowstorm. Moreover, this mental busyness was very self-absorbed. As a matter of fact, it was definitely not Su Xiao's original intentions. In the depths of his heart, Su Fengnian missed the Jianghu outside Beiliang. That had once been his childhood dream. He had once thought that it was the snowman he had compared to Xinyuan Qingfeng. Once it melted, it melted. He could not ask for it again. There were many people in the Jianghu who made Su Fengnian feel regret and guilt. Su Fengnian missed Old Huang with a missing front tooth, the wanderer with a wooden sword, the old man with a sheepskin coat who was past his prime, Hong Shixiang who rode an ox, his eldest sister who had married off to a distant place in Jiangnan, and even the demon couple in the Duck's Head Green Inn. He missed the Beimang woman, Qing Zhu Yang, who was constantly thinking about her dead daughter. There were many people in the Jianghu that he cared about, yet he could only watch on helplessly as they were separated from him, whether by life or death. There were many things that he had not done well. He could not stop Old Huang from going to Martial Emperor City, he could not stop Wen Hua from being defeated in the Jianghu, he could not keep his eldest sister alive, he could not stop his second sister from sitting on the dragon throne, and he could not stop Sweet Potato from leaving Dunhuang City. As a result, Su Fengnian often felt that being the hereditary king of Beiliang was just a heavy burden that he could not escape from. It was not something that he truly wanted to do. Only now did Su Fengnian begin to think deeply about what he wanted to do after being asked by Li Qingshan. Su Fengnian gazed at the 9 heavens and said gently, "The heavenly path is a single plank bridge that only the heavens can walk on. The great path is a broad path that everyone in the secular world can walk on." He had no idea just how similar this sentence was to Li Yufu, who could make countless bolts of lightning roll through the world. In the end, Su Fengnian said to himself, "What do I want to do? It's so simple. I just want to be Su Zhao's son." Su Zhao gave so many desperate commoners a path of survival in the spring and autumn period. As his son, I want to guard this path. If anyone refuses, I'll make them agree. Sui Xiegu, who had been waiting for a long time, rolled his eyes and said impatiently, "Kid, are you going to fight or not?" Su Fengnian smiled apologetically. He raised his hand and the Shudao sword emerged from its sheath. However, at this moment, a woman's voice suddenly rang out in everyone's ears, "Sui Xiegu, get down here." Su Fengnian took pleasure in Sui Xiegu's misfortune. He smiled and asked, "Old Senior Sui, are you going to fight or not?" Sui Xiegu's expression stiffened. He gritted his teeth and said, "I'm going to fight. Why wouldn't I fight? Tantai Pingjing, there's no place for women to speak here." Su Fengnian restrained his smile and said, "It's fine." Li Chungang said that everything in the world is a matter of one sword. He glanced at the Shudao and said softly, "Go." The ancient sword, Shudao, instantly disappeared. Sui Xiegu suddenly raised his head. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "But this sword of mine is a bit too much." Almost at the same time, the 100 swords of the Wu family in Beiliang, Xianyuan Qingfeng, Luoyang, Suing, Tuoba, Deng Mao, the man who did not use a sword but carried a sword for his wife, the masters of the Beimang chess and sword music school, Qi Xianxia who was still traveling outside Mount Longhu, the Tangxi sword Immortal Lu Baijie in the capital, the young Taoist Li Yufu who was rushing to Mount Wudang with his disciple Yufu, and Jiang Ni who was in a daze in the old capital of De Chu, all raised their heads at the same time. Especially Jiang Ni, who hesitated and muttered to himself, "Borrow." The Wu family's sword tomb, Dongyue's sword pool, and the chess and sword music school were widely recognized as the places with the most swords in Jianghu. All the famous swords in the world flew into the sky to Beiliang.